overcome these challenges, to restore the soul and secure the future of America, requires so much more than words. It requires the most elusive of all things in a democracy: unity. Unity. In another January, on New Year's Day in 1863, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. When he put pen to paper, the president said, and I quote, "If my name ever goes down into history, it'll be for this act, and my whole soul is in it." My whole soul is in it. Today, on this January day, my whole soul is in this, bringing America together, uniting our people, uniting our nation. And I ask every American to join me in this cause.
All right. Name is Ben Burgess, and this is Give Them an Argument. In a few minutes, going to be doing a panel on Biden and U.S. empire with Katie Halper, Daniel Bessner, and Rania Khalek. A little later on, David Griscom is going to be here for Outlaws and Revolutionaries, going to do a segment on the Highwaymen. But right now, I'm joined as always by our producer, Forrest Miller. And the voice that you just heard was President Joe Biden at his inauguration, comparing as the overwhelming moral imperative of his presidency, the pursuit of bipartisan unity to the abolition of slavery. That as important as ending slavery was to Lincoln, the unity is to Biden. Those are actual words that came out of his mouth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could see the kind of Civil War imagery, and I feel like a lot of liberals right now feel like we're almost on a verge of like a civil war. But, you know, it's like their peace being disrupted, I guess, is them, you know, being on the verge of a civil war.
Yeah, and yeah, actually, one of the less inspired bits of wordplay in the inaugural address was he used the phrase "uncivil war." So it's which I think Will Menaker pointed out almost sounds like the Guns N' Roses Civil War song. What's so civil about war anyway? But it is still remarkable, and I think that it tells you everything that you need to know about what this incoming administration is going to be, because a lot of people, there's been a lot of loose talk about Biden as like a possible second FDR. I mean, Bernie said that. He said, Biden could be a new FDR, the most progressive president, since FDR. And even though he's saying, could be, so it's not as bad as it would be if he was saying will be, there has been a lot of that going around. But I think if you pay attention to the inaugural address, if you pay attention to his first round of executive orders, it's pretty clear that his goal is actually to not be a second FDR. His goal is to be a second Barack Obama. Yeah,
for sure. And I mean, that's one of the problems with having a vice president kind of pushed into the slot of president now, because they have they have to push through the legacy that they helped build. You know what I mean? So there's no breaking away from the Obama legacy, even if he wanted to, which clearly he doesn't for that reason.
Yeah, exactly. So he did a lot of good things in the day one executive orders and other day one actions. But almost all of those good things fell into one of two categories. So either they were like kind of emergency measures because of the current like crazy unprecedented crisis, that we're going through, like extending, eviction, moratorium, because obviously, the COVID crisis and the economic fallout of that has been insane and unprecedented. Or one category, and then the other category was just restoring the status quo from January 19th, 2017. Which was most of what he did. So, and again, this is all good stuff, more or less. It's reversing the Muslim ban, like reversing a long series of Trump policies, and some of these Trump policies really are very bad, and it's good that they're reversed. But I think we do need to be real about what the agenda is. This is not that it's some like massive move to the left by the Democratic Party establishment. It's just literally that he wants to turn back the clock to where it was before Donald Trump became president. And the reason that distinction, I think, is worth harping on, and obviously we're going to get into the foreign policy dimension of this in a few minutes, but the reason that it's worth harping on, in like even in terms of domestic policy, is that what the status quo was before Donald Trump became president is the reason that Donald Trump became president.
Yeah, definitely.
Like it's, if you look back at the Obama administration, Obama wasn't, doing some, sweeping attempt to ban people to come over from a bunch of Muslim countries. He wasn't, appointing social conservatives to the Supreme Court. He wasn't doing things like appointing that guy that Biden fired, on his first day, who was the general counsel for the National Labor Relations Board, who was basically on a one-man crusade to stop the enforcement of labor law. And so all of these are ways in which the Obama period was better. But the Obama period was also a time when economic inequality was continuously increasing, like every year that Barack Obama was president. The Obama period was a time when the only response of the Obama administration, like we can even really specifically talk about electoral consequences, because look at like West Virginia, which was a very solidly Democratic state, which makes sense, because the historical role of the miners' unions there. But then it ended up going to Trump. And, if you look at the Obama years in West Virginia, the Obama years are a time when the only government experience, like the only government response to the plight of unemployed miners, was to plant a few technology training centers, which is basically an elaborate way of saying, screw you, stop whining and learn to code.
Yeah. And I mean, they have Rahm Emanuel, who literally was saying learn to code on a.
Yeah, that's right, he did.
Yeah. So, it's past even like the joke, and, it becomes reality at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, these are the conditions that led to enough people in crucial, swing states being willing to roll the dice on Trump in the first place. And more importantly, these are the conditions that led to the Democratic turnout being so much lower in 2016 than it was in 2012, which is the main reason that Trump won. And it's also, I think, if you look at the speech itself, obviously a lot of it was just babble. Like the part that we played earlier was like, honestly, one of the parts where relatively coherent thoughts were expressed. Like a lot of it was just like babble. It was like that. Yeah. If people remember, we're not going to risk the copyright strike by playing it, but if people remember, there's this classic episode of The Simpsons. There's a early Treehouse of Horror episode where these aliens, Kang and Kodos, replace Bill Clinton and Bob Dole so that one or the other of them will win the 1996 election. And there's the speech that Kang gives as Bill Clinton that's like, forwards, not backwards, upwards, not forwards, always twirling towards freedom. And that literally is what most of the inaugural address reminded me of. But I think there were two like real political themes there. And if you pay attention to either one of them, it's not good, because one of them was the Trump era as this like crazy aberration from the American norm. Like there was a lot of that. Like there were tons of references to January 6th. He talked a lot about peaceful transfer of power. And in fact, some of it was like a little weird because like on the one hand, he was talking about Lincoln, but on the other hand, he said we've had an uninterrupted tradition of peaceful transfer of power for 200 years.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I would think that several states starting an armed revolution because the guy that they hated won would count as a pretty significant exception to that, but whatever. And so part of it was, okay, Trump is this weird, freakish aberration from American history. That we're ending that now. We're going back to normal, and
a kind of an aberration from the Republican Party, because when he's saying I'm going to restore bipartisan unity, he's basically saying that Trump isn't synonymous with the Republican Party, and that somehow their agenda post Trump is going to be different than the incredibly obstructionist, incredibly devastating, abhorrent agenda that they've had for the last 4 years.
No, totally. Well, that's the thing, because that's the other theme, right? So the first theme was Trump is a weird aberration that's going to be corrected now, and the second theme was what we got in that clip we played earlier: unity, right? That unity is literally as important to him as freeing the slaves was to Lincoln, and which again, amazing. But the two go together in exactly the way that you just said, because the whole point about unity is that it's a poetic way of saying bipartisanship, and Trump is a crazy aberration. Now we're going to have unity is a way of saying, okay, the Republicans went a little crazy there for a few years, but now they're going to go back to normal, and we are going to go back to the way things were in the Obama years when bipartisanship was a article of faith, that Obama spent his whole first term more or less questing for this grand bargain with Republicans to save Social Security, Medicare, and the rest by slashing them.
Yeah.
And the only reason that didn't happen was that the Republicans were so obstructionist they wouldn't even go for it. But then, like during the 2012 election, Obama infamously said, "Oh, don't worry about it. When after I beat Mitt Romney, the fever will break." That was his phrase: "The fever will break, and Republicans will go back to their senses." And Biden in 2019, he was saying the same thing on the campaign trail. He was saying that the Republicans are going to come to their senses after Trump, and in fact, last month, he was saying the same thing. Literally, when most major Republicans were refusing to recognize his election, he was still saying that my Republican friends are going to be acting very differently after Trump is out. It's going to go back to normal, and of course that's weird and delusional just on its own terms.
Yeah.
Especially, my God, right after everything like we've seen even just the last few weeks. But more importantly, if you look at that rhetoric, you really think that this guy is ready for some big, progressive break from the Democratic consensus? You think that, he's, forget the idea that he would have second thoughts about Medicare for all. You think he's going to actually fight for a public option? Like that the guy who spent 2/3 of his inaugural address talking about the importance of bipartisan unity is going to go to war with the Republican Party, and for that matter with the Democratic Party's donor class, in order to achieve a public option, which is absolutely what it would take to achieve that. Of course he's not going to.
Yeah. And you can already see him backtracking off, even the $2,000 a month. Like now it's, $1,400, and he wants to work with the Republican Party, and he wants to make sure that they agree to the terms of his, coronavirus stimulus package. He's not even willing to ram that through the Senate using Bernie as his, using that process, reconciliation. So it's like, I don't know, he's going to be unwilling to do anything that he isn't going to be able to meet, halfway with the Republican Party.
Totally. And I think the reason that this matters, just to put a little bow on it before we, talk about the Patreon and then bring on Katie, I think the reason that this is worth harping on is because a lot of people on the left, a lot of people that I respect and like, I think are fooling themselves about Biden. Because they'll acknowledge, oh, he's very bad. He's, obviously, we hate his record, this and that. But they think that they're going to accomplish things by pressuring Biden. That they've got this conception of the role of the left where we are in a kind of permanent coalition with Biden and the centrists. And of course, we're the most left-wing edge of that coalition. But our role is to act like loyal foot soldiers, just, more or less blame everything on the Republicans, but to kind of lobby from within the coalition to get Biden to do more left-wing things. And I'm not saying that there's no truth to the idea that it could work with that. I think it could be locally true in certain areas, maybe, that that Biden could be pressured to do more progressive things than he might otherwise. But I think anything that would really go against the interests of capital in any significant way, and I'm not talking about workers control the means of production here. I'm talking about even a public option.
Yeah.
Right? That anything like that, significant debt, forget any of that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
That anything that would go significantly against the interests of capital, he's just not going to do it. And so if you have that mindset, if that's your way of approaching Biden, that you're doing all this Kremlinology to be ooh, but he's saying something that's 3 degrees to the left of what Obama would have said. That's a big victory for us. I think you're doing it wrong. Ultimately, you just have to buckle in for the fact. And I know that people don't like this because they want to, there's always the quest for the quick fix. It's going to get us the stuff that we want. But the only way we're going to get the stuff we want, even the social democratic basics, is to just win a fuck ton of elections against centrists.
Yeah.
And so if that's your perspective, that the only way we're going to get the things that we want is if, instead of having a squad of that you could count on your fingers and pressuring Biden, that you just have to beat these people to take power for yourself, then you're going to be talking about Biden in a very different way because you're going to want to try to draw contrast with him whenever you possibly can.
Well, the coalition approach is, it's an expression of powerlessness. You know what I mean? People are unwilling to accept the fact that they're going to have to win these elections. They're going to have to win these victories. It is the quick fix, but it's an expression of, well, we might not have won this election. We might not have won the primary. We might not, you know what I mean? But there's still options for us, and this is the power structure the way it is, and you have to work with it. The confrontational approach, it's well, we haven't won elections in these places, so we can't. You know what I mean? We're only going to win by working with Biden, and I'm sure he's going to come to his senses. But Biden right now has the perfect excuse not to come to his senses, which is the pandemic. At the end of the pandemic, whatever money they've spent, they're going to say we don't have money for anything else. And so having a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House right now doesn't really mean that much, if you don't have progressives, because the progressive or the centrists that exist right now are just going to say, we just had a massive amount of spending. We had a massive amount of emergency measures, and we can't do anything else. I'm sorry. It's not us. It's it's the budget. We spent all this money already. We don't have extra money, and they have that perfect out.
Yeah. No, I think that's totally right. And I think if you get excited about whatever little crumbs they throw you, then you're going to miss that bigger picture, and you're certainly going to miss the chance to draw the kind of contrast that we need to draw. To kind of build up towards that longer term strategy of just beating them so we can take power for ourselves and do that instead of somehow pressuring or tricking them into doing those things for us. But before we bring on the panel, which we're about to do, talk about Biden's foreign policy, you have the new comic from J. Andrew World.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's the bring out the GIMP scene from Pulp Fiction. Guys, bring out the GIMP. GIMP's watching to give them an argument with Ben Burgess. Well, I guess you're going to have to make him stop now, won't you? Every time he watches that show, he won't shut up about the Great Gas, socialism, or The Sopranos. The Gimp and I used to go out for milkshakes at Jackrabbit Slim's. Now that he's subscribed to Ben Burgess on Patreon, we don't get to go out no more. It's a real shame we only have 2 ball gags. So that's a pretty, if you have Pulp Fiction memorized enough to find that funny, it's a good, it's a good promo for the Patreon. Speaking of the Patreon, I should say we're going to play a clip from this later, a little preview. The patron episode on Thursday this week is going to be Bessner. It's a very Bessner heavy week. And Amber Lee Frost talking about their Jacobin article about QAnon. So that comes out on Thursday to get access to that and every other patron bonus episode. So like the week, last week we had the Sopranos, recap episode with Mike Racine, Nando Vila, and Wosny Lambre. The week before that, we had Dasha from Red Scare. The week before that, we had Gene Bajalan giving a beginner's guide to the Kurdish liberation struggle. So lots of good stuff up on there. So get access to all of that for, I can't not do the Pulp Fiction joke now. The monthly cost of a milkshake in a 50s nostalgia diner in 1994. You get all of that. And more importantly, it's it's a way to support the show if you like the work that we're doing here and you want us to be able to keep doing it and pay everybody's salaries. So again, that's patreon.com/Ben Burgess. But with that, let's bring on the panel. So have Daniel Bessner, who, as I say, it's going to be a very Bessner heavy week because as well as this and the patron episode on Thursday. He's also coming back on Wednesday to talk about Dr. Strangelove with me, Forrest, Jacobin deputy editor Micah Utrecht, and philosophy professor Ryan Lake. So that should be really good. Katie Halper, host, of course, of the Katie Halper Show. And Rania Khalek making her debut on Give Them an Argument. Rania, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thanks for having me on. I'm Rania Khalek. I host the Soapbox channel and new podcast called Left Bitches. And just a warning, I am in Beirut, so it's like 3 a.m. I'm a champion.
Yeah, that's amazing. I can't believe that you're on at 3 a.m.
I do this to myself all the time, but I can do it. It's like a test of like endurance and if I'm like really old or not.
Well, I'm definitely too old to, I would be able to do that, position reversed.
Yeah, no.
What's that?
No way. That's truly.
I can hear you because he's going hard of hearing already.
That's right.
Yeah.
Older millennials here, I think, right? This is like the older, except Forrest podcast crew.
We're senior millennials. I think actually Rania's full on millennial. I think
I'm pretty much like smack in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm smack in the middle millennial.
Centrist. You're a centrist millennial.
I'm a centrist millennial.
Moderate millennial, yeah.
Yeah. I think I'm on the
We're for sure.
Definitely on the older end of that. I think the annoying USA Today term is Zennial. But
I'm millennial identify though.
I'm definitely culturally a millennial.
Which means that Joe Biden has no empathy for me.
That's right. Yeah.
Give me a break.
As he shouldn't. Like we're such a stuck up entitled generation that
we didn't work hard getting arrested visiting Nelson Mandela like he did.
Exactly. We're so lazy. We just can't even like pay off our student debt. And
you know what he actually did, by the way? Sorry, I'm just jumping into this. You haven't even introduced me, but you know what he actually did? He had to go through a separate like airport security line because he's white and it was during apartheid, and that is what he confused with being arrested.
Yes. I love it.
It's actually amazing. Yeah.
So like you guys are in the media, like what do people say when they just say, but like what are they thinking when they just say obviously bizarre lies? It's so weird because it's so easily traceable. It's not like 1948 when no one had access to anything and you could like people
might really believe, but Katie has a point. He might really believe that waiting in line in like a weird checkpoint area was like arrest or something, or being detained.
I mean, in the very literal, like arrest, like wait, or stopping. But I think honestly, he's been so coddled. I almost don't blame him. I almost admire it. He's so coddled by the media. As is, by the way, Mayor Pete. I mean, just a reminder, this guy was named to the Department of Transportation, and nobody even mentions the fact that his Smart Streets program resulted in the death of an 11-year-old Black young man named Tristan Moore. And you don't know that name because no one's mentioned it, and it should be a hashtag, Tristan, Moore, Moore. He was 11 years old. And even if you say, because I don't know enough about transportation, I'm not going to say the Smart Streets program, killed a child and has blood on its hands. And I mean, it did do that. But for all I know, an urban planner can say with a lot of certainty, well, it saved these many lives, right? Like saved lives in the net. But the fact that he is so entitled, Mayo Pete, and all of his apologists, that they don't even feel the need to make that point. They don't even have to mention this kid, 11 years old, hit and killed by a car because Mayo Pete's program, Smart Streets, removed a traffic light. It's unbelievable.
Wait, it gets worse because after that happened, so they removed the traffic light, right? And this was at an intersection that a lot of kids use to get to a bus stop to get to school. And so that's how this kid died, trying to get to the bus stop at this big intersection. But then Mayor Pete blamed the kid.
And he darted into the street.
He darted into the street, and like, what are you gonna do? The kid just ran into the street. Well, there was no light.
It's just like that makes me. I do feel like we're living. I mean, the term gaslit is really overused, but like that is an appropriate.
The media coddles these people, except for, and maybe this brings it back to, I guess, what we're supposed to talk about here. When it comes to foreign policy. And if you guys watch the like rapid fire interrogation of Anthony Blinken, Joe Biden's nominee for Secretary of State, by all these neocons like Lindsey Graham, like that's the only time that these people are treated with like skepticism and lots of questions, is to see if they're sufficiently hawkish.
Right. It's like when you agree with someone that a movie is terrible, but for very different reasons. That's how I feel when I'm watching Republicans question Dem noms and picks. Yeah.
And of course, that Buttigieg story really reminds one of what Samantha Power's caravan did when she killed a young.
Oh, I forgot about that.
So it's like an analogy.
What is the Samantha Power's caravan?
I forget exactly where she was. It was
Rania was probably there.
Probably there. Actually, where was it? Now I want to look it up. Hang on. She ran over like a child.
Yeah,
her car. Yeah, in an African country. Hang on.
Yeah, during the Ebola outbreak, I believe, of 2014, and her caravan ran over a child and killed the child.
It was like a hit and run. It wasn't just like they didn't even like get out to check her. It was really.
She found out.
Cameroon.
Yeah, Cameroon. And so her car went ahead, and she didn't find out about it until later. And she has a chapter in her memoir about it. It really, obviously.
It's funny. I just like looked it up really quickly. The opening line in The Guardian is that the young boy darted into the road.
Not the caravan. The Mayo Pete one.
No. The Samantha Power one. The opening sentence in The Guardian basically is just, implicitly blaming the child.
So there is an epidemic, a pandemic of Black children darting into roads. That's what it's about. It's not actually about.
It's global. From South Bend, Indiana.
I cannot believe that. Like, I thought you were clear. I can't believe that.
Yeah, stop darting into all these roads when it comes to, Democratic policymakers and politicians,
Yeah, and but the important thing is that Pete Buttigieg, this is a really historic thing because he's the first openly gay cabinet secretary who's going to be confirmed by the Senate. There was one active one. So they're slicing these first like really thin here, to make this work.
Right, because Trump named one. He just wasn't confirmed by the Senate, right? That's how it works. Yeah, that was amazing. That was like one of the best. Yeah.
Yeah, he is the first openly gay. We have there's like a trans person who was appointed to a position, and now we're getting Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill.
Not
just like
first openly gay, first openly gay.
Yeah, but
be confirmed by
you're cabinet secretary to be confirmed by the Senate because the Trump one was just acted.
Right.
So, but again, the fact that like even Donald Trump was willing to do this should tell you something about how whatever. But
radical.
But this is definitely going to be the most diverse, diverse group of people to have ever bombed and imposed sanctions on a bunch of countries for over the course of the next 4 to 8 years. And I want to get into that. I think a natural starting point for us. Do we have the clip of Biden talking about Iraq?
Yeah, hold on.
And you and I both know, and all of us here really know, and it's the thing we have to face, that the only way we're going to get rid of Saddam Hussein is we're going to end up having to start it alone, and it's going to require guys like you in uniform to be back on foot in the desert, taking taking Saddam down. You know it, and I know it. So I think we should not kid ourselves here. There's stark choices. I happen to agree with your assessment. A, that diplomacy was picked over inspection-driven confrontation. B, that there's an illusion of arms control that cannot guarantee he will have no system of no weapons of mass destruction. And C, that as long as he's there, he's concluded he can absorb airstrikes. So I think you've done a significant service for this country. A different policy judgment has been made. If we don't like the policy judgment, in my view, from observation has been made by the administration and the Security Council and our allies. If we don't like it, we should step up to the ball and say it, because you forced us, and I think properly so, to a day of reckoning here about what our policy should be. I look forward to hearing what you have to say, and welcome, even without the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense.
I'll vote for this because we should support compelling Iraq to make good on its obligations to the United Nations. I'm among those who had serious reservations about and flat out straight opposition to the first draft proposed by the White House on September 19th. The draft raised more questions than it answered. It was not clear whether the authorization requested by the president to use force was limited to Iraq or applicable to the region as a whole. It was not clear whether the objective was to compel Iraq to destroy its weapons of mass destruction programs, to liberate Kuwaiti prisoners, or to end Saddam Hussein's regime. It was not clear whether the rationale for action was to enforce the UN Security Council resolutions that Saddam has flouted for the last decade, or to implement a new doctrine of preemption. And it was not clear whether the administration considered working through the UN and working with allies important or irrelevant. Saddam is dangerous. The world would be a better place without him. But the reason he poses a growing danger to the United States and its allies is that he possesses chemical and biological weapons and is seeking, with his $2 billion a year illegally skimmed from the UN Fund for Food, his oil for food program, for peace program, that he is seeking nuclear weapons.
Contrary to what some in my party might think, Iraq was a problem that had to be dealt with sooner rather than later. So I commend the president. He was right to enforce the solemn commitments made by Saddam. If they were not enforced, what good would they be, and what value those institutions? For me, the issue is never whether we had to deal with Saddam, but when and how we dealt with Saddam. And it's precisely the when and how that I think this administration got wrong. We went to war too soon. We went to war with too few troops. We went to war without the world when we could have had many with us. And we're paying the price for it now.
Pause it. Now, Senator, you voted for this war.
Sure did.
With reservations, but you
The
did
right
vote for it.
Vote too.
So you would vote the same way today as you did a year ago.
I would, but no one can really hold us responsible for the incompetence of the administration in the aftermath. Many, many people said, look, Mr. President, plan for this better before you go.
So then is it any surprise to you that Spain has decided to pull its troops?
I must tell you it's not a surprise, although I want to make it clear I did not predict it or anticipate it. I assumed, like I think the vast majority of people did, without a lot of reflection, that it was likely that you were going to see Aznar reelected.
Democratic Senator Joe Biden is the ranking minority member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Barack Obama and I agree fully and completely on one thing. You've got to have a timeline to draw down the troops and shift responsibility to the Iraqis. We're spending $10 billion a month while the Iraqis have an $80 billion surplus. Barack says it's time for them to spend their own money, have the 400,000 military we've trained for them begin to take their own responsibility and gradually over 6 months, 16 months withdraw. John McCain, this is a fundamental difference between us. We will end this war. For John McCain, there is no end in sight to end this war. Fundamental difference. We will end this war.
Governor.
The reason I voted the way I did was to try to prevent a war from happening because, remember, the threat was to go to war. The argument was because Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So he said that I need to be able to get the Security Council to agree to send in inspectors to put pressure on Saddam to find out whether or not he's producing nuclear weapons. And at the time, I said, that's your reason. All right, I get it. That was the rationale was that's the way to not go to war because I didn't believe he had those nuclear weapons.
Joe Biden has had an incredible amount of work done. He looks good now. Look at those cheekbones. Oh my God.
He went through a phase where Botox was very badly done. You could tell. It was back during those vice presidential debates with Sarah Palin. But man, he's so old.
Yeah, he's so old. I haven't seen Biden like that in so long. He has that baby face, that baby fat of a 65-year-old.
And he's just he can speak more eloquently and now when he talks, it's just really grandfather in an old person's home. I'm really not trying to be offensive. I know people get really touchy about that, but man,
well, he gets really touchy about a lot of things.
It's very
around a lot of
down
people.
Your neck a little bit.
Yeah, listen up, man.
Yeah, listen, fat.
Listen, fat. That's right. That's awesome.
That was according to Simone Sanders. He was just saying, listen, the facts. Imagine being Simone Sanders playing Mad Libs. It must have been a constant yeah. My God.
Yeah,
man,
the way that he would just yell at voters was amazing.
I'm going
Yeah. And especially because after the 4 years of clutching, liberals clutching their pearls about Trump's, rudeness and, lack of decorum, that they were fine with that. It's the same thing as, the point, was making earlier about how he just again, after 4 years of hearing about, oh, this is terrible, the Trump administration, this is a post-truth world, that Biden wasn't punished in any way, by the media or by the Democratic Party for just lying about being arrested in apartheid South Africa. Oh. And in 2019, September 2019, he claimed, and, we just watched that whole progression of what his positions were in Iraq. September 2019, he claimed that he'd turned against the Iraq war the moment it started. He opposed it the moment it started. Even the Washington Post, said that, fact-checked him on that. Which is a rare instance of them bothering to do that.
Now
it's even
worse.
It's even worse with Biden, though, because he actually played an instrumental role in whipping Democratic votes in the Senate to support that war. And one of his closest advisors at the time, Anthony Blinken, is now his Secretary of State. What I will give Biden some credit for, and it's not easy for me to say nice things about him in this respect, is that when he was vice president, he was one of the voices of restraint when it came to a lot of the military interventions in Libya. in Syria, he was, he wasn't a huge voice of restraint, but he openly, there was like one time where he came out and openly made a statement about, are the weapons that we're giving to the Syrians are ending up in the hands of extremists, and some of our allies are giving extremists weapons. And he called out like Turkey and Qatar and the UAE, and then he had to go and apologize to them the next day for saying that. But it was interesting to watch the confirmation hearing for Anthony Blinken, because one of the issues that a lot of the Republicans on the Foreign Relations committees had with Anthony Blinken was that Joe Biden, his boss, opposed the intervention in Libya. And so Anthony Blinken had to like reassure them. He was like, yeah, but I was one of the voices like whispering in his ear that he should totally do it. And he ultimately did. So I won. So really, like, it matters who's Biden surrounding himself with. And that's what's really disturbing, because he's not, he's kind of not even there. Like, it's that, you know what I mean? Like, he's not going to be the one making policy. It's the people he's surrounding himself with. And some of them are people who could have been worse, right? Like, it could have been Susan Rice. I think it's better that it's Anthony Blinken and not Susan Rice. I think it's better that it's Lloyd Austin and not Michelle Flournoy, but it's still not good.
God, 2 men.
Yeah. I would agree with that. And just one thing I want to emphasize for people who don't know, the very first clip was from the late 1990s. And that's because it was under the Clinton administration that a law was passed that made it official U.S. policy to overthrow Saddam Hussein. And so this is actually really interesting, because people always talk about what if Gore was in there, blah, blah, blah. I actually don't think it's like so unclear that Gore would have done nothing with regards to Iraq, because, again, that was the policy of the Clinton administration.
So clear, you mean? You said so unclear. You mean you don't think it was so
clear? You
clear?
don't think it's so clear?
So I don't think it was so clear that that Gore wouldn't have invaded Iraq.
We were on a trajectory, right? The U.S. had spent a decade softening Iraq up with these starvation sanctions that not only like killed 500,000 children under the age of 5, but also just destroyed the country economically, destroyed its education system, its infrastructure, destroyed its society from the inside out. That's what those sanctions did. So the U.S. was on that trajectory, like Daniel mentioned, and you can kind of see a similar situation with certain countries now. Like, obviously the U.S. already tried to regime change Syria and it didn't work, but Syria is now facing this really horrible sanctions program that's starving the country, that's really destroying it from the inside out, that's like leading to this brain drain, that's making just life completely miserable in a country that used to be quite self-sufficient. Like, it's not sufficient in anything now, it's completely aid dependent.
That first clip was 98, by the way, to Daniel's point.
Yeah, so you can imagine, like, I don't think it's totally out of the question that Gore, Gore could have invaded Iraq. Certainly Joe Lieberman as vice president, would have been, in the Cheney chair, would have been pushing for that. For sure, he might not have done it, but if he didn't do it, one thing I think we can be confident about is he would not have lifted the sanctions in Iraq, stopped the policy of regular bombings that have been happening, throughout the later Clinton years. All of which means that even if there hadn't been an invasion, what would have happened in those 48 years of Gore being president would have been pretty brutal, because it's just impossible to imagine him walking back from that. And certainly, I think Afghanistan. That's just a given. Like, of course, Gore would have invaded Afghanistan.
It's interesting to think of to watch that clip of Joe Biden talk about how Republicans didn't have a plan for after. Right. That was his big criticism in the immediate aftermath of like when the war just like became a disaster, because he went and supported the same thing in Libya. Like, liberals do it. They just do it differently. Right. And what they did in Libya, they turned Libya into like a chaotic country that has no functioning
market though.
Yeah. Right. There are open air slave markets, a bunch of, a collection of fighting, militias funded by different countries. Like, there's no stability in that country anymore. They didn't have a plan either for Libya. Like, it's the same. It's like both of these parties do tend to gravitate towards similar ends. They just kind of find different ways of getting there.
Yeah. And I think it is important to know with the Libya thing that like does really show up. One of the things that's most horrifying about that montage of Biden clips, because later on, when he starts to be a little bit more critical, his criticism is that they weren't doing it right, that they have that, like, there was some way that they could have had like a better plan. They could have done something such that they could have invaded, like cluster bombed, invaded and occupied Iraq, and the Iraqis would have liked it, and there wouldn't have been, insurgency and civil war afterwards. And that same delusion is there, like, even though whatever the differences are between those two wars, like that same basic delusion was there, thinking that you could, that you could topple, like bomb Libya and topple the regime there, et cetera, and that it would be fine.
Yeah, and I think that's really important to emphasize, just building on Rania's and Ben's points, is that there really hasn't been a real discussion about sort of the fundamental principles of foreign policy since, I'd say, the Republican National Convention in 1952, when Robert Taft lost to Dwight D. Eisenhower, and there was someone actually arguing that the United States shouldn't rule the world. So you wind up having, I think, the narcissism of small differences in U.S. foreign policy, where it's like, it's a particular, particularly with liberals in the 1990s and 2000s, it was really about sort of building a coalition to use force as opposed to using force unilaterally, right? And like there's some sort of difference in that. It's not the exact same thing, but the fundamental strategic posture is basically the same, which is that the U.S. is kind of going to use its overwhelming power to use force. So that's what's so interesting about this moment, because even though Trump didn't do much, as we can see, it was proven pretty clearly in his election that bashing U.S. foreign policy isn't really a third rail in any stretch of the imagination. So it'll be really interesting to see what people like Jake Sullivan or Blinken do. I mean, I'm pretty pessimistic, but I think it's also true that 2021 is not, when Blinken was arguing in 2010, 2011 to invade Libya. It'd be interesting to see how someone would approach that situation. I honestly don't know. Again, I'm very pessimistic, but I just don't think it's quite the same thing. But
yeah, and I should say that, like, that is a really interesting thing about Trump, because I think both things are true. That Trump, by and large, was pretty, like, much more continuous with previous American foreign policy than not. He actually greatly increased the rate of drone strikes in Yemen. He came. People want to give him credit for not starting any new wars, but that's a little bit. I've always thought it's a little bit like saying, okay, you scattered a bunch of matches around a dry forest, but like, you didn't have an actual forest fire. He did tear up the Iran deal and, and assassinate Soleimani and etc. All of that could have easily.
Not for lack of trying. It's not for lack of trying, right?
Exactly. But it is interesting that rhetorically, he did sometimes say these very anti-war sounding things. Like that's actually. That's something we pointed out in our article about the fascism debate, that's something that's like weirdly not remarked on very often in those debates, that like something that all actual historical fascist movements have in common is that they have this constant, glorification of war and militarism. And Trump really didn't, right? Which like to like a remarkable extent he didn't.
Yeah, the Vietnam line is the close. What do you say? The sexual revolution was my Vietnam. Is that the line?
No. That's right. He said that. I think what he said was not getting STDs in the 80s was his Vietnam.
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's see. Do we lose Forrest?
He also.
Okay, that's okay. That's okay. Katie, go.
No, I think it's like a weird combination, right? Because he definitely ran as an anti-war. He ran as a right-wing anti-war person, right? Like kind of an isolationist, obviously. Oh my God, I don't know if you guys encountered this. I can't stand this. If you want to say something like that, then you have people who think that they're really smart because they started studying politics and history like 5 minutes ago. They're like, he's not anti-war. He's racist. Like, he's not anti-imperialist. It's like, yeah, we know that. There's an entire history and political sector of people that hate war for the wrong reasons. So I'm just going to say that. I shouldn't even be, giving these people that attention, but it drives me crazy. And I already start hearing it in my head. But he definitely, he did have a, at the same time, it's almost, the Soleimani thing is almost a perfect example. Like he had like no restraint. He like killed one dude And he killed other people. I'm not pretending.
I guarantee you Trump didn't know who the guy was when Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence came to him and were like, we have a terrorist.
I disagree. I think it's meme based. This was meme warfare. He did some really good Game of Thrones memes against Trump. They went back and forth. So maybe Pompeo told Trump about him, but I do think it was personal.
I don't know. I really don't think, like, I think that Trump put people in charge of his policy who were a bunch of militaristic, nationalistic, like Christian crusading psychos.
Like Pompeo.
He didn't really care. Trump doesn't have any principles. He didn't really care. He had some instincts against openly expanding the wars and stuff like that. And that was, of course, the one time he would get criticisms is when he would like rhetorically be like, I want to draw down troops or I want to bring troops home. And then everybody would like lose their minds. But I mean, what I think is interesting about this incoming administration is, it's not 2010 or 2011 anymore. Americans don't have an appetite for more war. And there's a lot more domestic things that need to be dealt with. Like there's this global pandemic that's like devastated the US economy in a really dramatic way, but has also, I think, increased tensions with China. And I really think that's going to be, the future. We know that's the future, right? That's the future of like warfare, is this growing Cold War with China, this great power competition. And I think the COVID issue accelerated that because China dealt with it. Their economy is doing great. They're like one of the only economies that's growing. They're kind of like a normal country right now, like nowhere else. And then the US is
Wuhan.
Yeah, right. The US is just a complete disaster and people are facing economic ruin. The government still isn't really helping people. And it's just
I have a question for you, actually. I'm curious what you think about in light of that. What do you think about Xi sort of drawing back the Belt and Road Initiative? Because that's pretty interesting.
Can you explain what that is for listeners and viewers who don't know?
Oh, sure. So the Belt and Road Initiative was this big development effort undertaken by the PRC under Xi. And it was like, there was a lot of writing about, the last 3 to 5, 6 years about how this is like, this shows that China has like world ambitions and it's going to take over the world. And this was the big point for the new Cold War with China, is the Belt and Road Initiative. That's what you'll find. That's what they point to. And sort of the creation of like counter-hegemonic institutions like the Asian Infrastructure Development, blah, blah, blah. But it's really the Belt and Road Initiative because it expands China into places like Africa. But what actually wound up going on with it was a lot of like the host countries weren't particularly happy because the initiative employed mostly Chinese workers and it wasn't necessarily how much benefit. And actually Xi, I think in the last 2 weeks, has basically announced that like that initiative is kind of done. So that's actually pretty interesting if we're like going to be China watchers, because that was like the thing that I think really would have gotten.
What next, right? Like, what's the next thing going to be? And I think, also the what we hear more open complaints from like U.S. officials than the Belt and Road Initiative complaints and economic exploitation by China or whatnot is the communications issue. Like China's, stealing our intellectual property because China's rising. And has made huge inroads in terms of like 5G technology, which, as we all know, is why we all have COVID. No, I'm just joking. But 5G technology, it's the future of communications. China has definitely surpassed the US. The US knows this. The Pentagon knows this. They say it in their papers. And that's why you constantly hear US officials complaining about intellectual property theft, because their whole thing is, the only reason China's ahead in this technology is because they stole it from our companies, from American companies. That's our intellectual property. They're putting Huawei under sanction to try and deny them access to certain things they need in order to build their 5G infrastructure around the world. So that's really the real like future tension line with China. And I think it's just going to get dramatically worse even under Biden. And I mean, I don't know what that will mean for the Middle East, because I actually do think some of the people like to, it's true that both parties are really bad on foreign policy, but I do think that, one positive aspect of having a Biden administration is going to be that there'll be less likely a war with Iran, right? Had there been a second Trump administration, we would have had a war with Iran, like no question. That's where we were headed. Now there's really a chance to move back towards diplomacy. And I also think that speaks to the US really moving out of the Middle East, not completely, but there's really, all of like, if you look at where American naval assets are, I don't know if this is an accurate number, but it's something like 2/3 to 3/4 of American naval assets are in Asia now.
Right. Endless war. I think Ronnie's exactly right. I think we're going to actually see that drawn down. I think especially because of the slow move off oil, which is going to really begin happening in the next 10, 15 years. And sort of coming at the end of these Afghanistan disaster is really going to see an end to endless war. The interesting thing is going to be where the U.S. community, including within like the so-called left, what we do with China. Because I think this is really interesting to me. I think there are some on the left who want good empire. Like I would call like the genuine left, the socialist left. You see this sort of trend, not necessarily in Jacobin, but you see it. And so it'll be really interesting. I think as one of the many things, I think that has the chance to maybe split the left a little bit over the approach.
I think it already is. I think the issue of China already is splitting the left. I think there's a certain segment of the left that is certain that it certainly sees China as like this huge tyrannical threat. Like they'll equate it like with fascism and they're Nazis and like they're genociding Uyghurs and just like all of these issues like are definitely already splitting the left. And then there's another there is like a growing, I think, which is a positive aspect, as there is a growing sense on the left that China is this new Cold War, and there's groups like Pivot to Peace that are arising that are, I think, doing really good work trying to manage that divide and provide some resources on why we shouldn't have a Cold War with China. But I don't think that, when I say escalation with war with China, I don't think there'll actually be any sort of hot war at all. I don't think the U.S. would ever be willing to take on China in that way, because China actually has could actually put up a fight, unlike a lot of our other.
The Chinese People's Liberation Army, I think, is actually the single biggest employer on the planet. But that might be wrong at this point. But I think I know that was true at one point. But yeah, I think there could be even I remember Sean Goody, as an editor at Jacobin, said this a division in a few different directions, within the left.
Great wall.
On China. Yeah. Well, a great wall that twists around so it divides people in a couple different directions. So, so there's the sort of socialism with Chinese characteristics is great view. There's the this is like Nazi Germany. It's actually good to have a Cold War with China view. And there's there are, this is not what we, this is not the model of a society we want. There are real human rights issues here, but also a new Cold War with China would be disastrous view. But I do want to circle back to that. And I also want to circle back to the Iran thing, but let's watch the Palestine clips.
Oh God.
Myself, I've spoken so many times, but were there not an Israel, the United States would have to invent one. The United States would have to invent an Israel. It's more than merely a moral obligation we have. It's a security necessity. It's for both Israel's sake and for the United States. The security of Israel and the United States is inextricably tied. And we will never, ever, ever abandon Israel out of our own self-interest.
He should run for president of Israel.
Yeah.
I didn't realize. I didn't realize he had said that again.
What's that?
I didn't realize he had said that again. I remember seeing an old clip of him saying that, from decades ago. That was more recent. He's repeated that line before. We'd have to invent an Israel if there wasn't one.
Awesome.
There's no solution for Israel other than a two-state solution. It does not exist. It's not possible to have a Jewish state in the Middle East without there being a two-state solution. And he has played to all the same fears and all the prejudices that exist in this country and in Israel. Bibi Netanyahu and I know one another well. He knows that I think what he's doing is outrageous. What we do is we have to put pressure constantly on the Israelis to move to a two-state solution, not withdraw physical aid from them in terms of their security. And lastly, I think that Senator Warren is correct. We have led by not the example of our power, but the power of our example. And the example we're demonstrating now is horrible. It's hurting us badly.
Thank you, Vice President Biden. Judy?
Awesome.
Yeah, that's wild. I think Bibi Netanyahu is actually my 7th or 8th cousin in a genie.
Really?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, for real. Yeah, some students did like a genealogy on this famous rabbi that I'm related to.
My condolences. We're like related to Netanyahu. That's got to be like a. I wouldn't brag about. That's terrible.
Leonard Nimoy. So you take the good.
Oh, yeah, well, Leonard Nimoy, okay. That's quite a range, from Leonard Nimoy to Bibi Netanyahu.
Good.
But yeah, by the way,
funny is the Israel lobby is like freaking out right now over the possible appointment of Rob Malley, which I think is really hilarious. He's not even on Palestine. They're considering appointing him to as the Iran envoy, but they also don't like his views on Palestine. But yeah, I don't think with regard to Palestine, I don't think anything's going to change. They're not going to move the embassy back. And they always Democrats are rhetorically starting to say things about the Likud party. That's what they have an issue with. They don't have an issue with Israel. They have an issue with the Likud party because it's just like an extension of the Republican Party. And so Netanyahu's in charge, they'll have some rhetorical complaints towards him. But as far as policy goes, they'll never actually pressure Israel in any real way. The only hope, in my opinion, for Israel-Palestine is the U.S. getting out of the Middle East, because the U.S. is the problem in that situation. They fund and arm one side to the teeth to do whatever they want to the other side.
Yeah. So this is kind of.
Wait, Ron, I'm just curious. Could you expand on what you think would happen? Because I'm not really an expert in this, but I've always thought the best that could happen is that somehow magically domestic politics in this country transforms. But it doesn't seem to me that the region really cares that much about Palestine.
The region doesn't. I mean, that's the issue. I mean, people, the street does care symbolically still to a degree, but there's just been so much utter devastation and destruction from one country to the next that Palestine isn't an issue that can really unite people the way it used to anymore. I think the war on Syria really was the death blow to the Palestinian cause. The Arab Spring was the death blow to the Palestinian cause in the region because it sectarianized the region. People became Sunnis and Shias, not just in Iraq, but everywhere. It became an issue of sect. And as a result,
because Palestine, of course, emerges from the 50s and the 60s era of Arab nationalism, right? So that is what that politics is organized around. So it's so interesting that you're seeing this fallout.
I mean, and also, I think one of the reasons that Palestine was, I wouldn't say immune, but to a degree, it was kind of immune from the sectarianization that happened all around it throughout the Middle East. Palestinians were somewhat immune from that because they were still united by Palestinian nationalism. So they weren't seeing themselves as Sunni Arabs, right? Whereas in Syria and Iraq and Lebanon, Sunni nationalism really took hold across the region. Also, for a lot of reasons due to the influence of Gulf-funded media, which really took that on and spread it. But I think, moving forward, the issue of Palestine is really going to be all about with the international community being enough. And they're not there yet. They're not there yet to say enough. I have a really, really pessimistic view. I don't think that, I think it's wonderful, the activism that takes place across the U.S. from, a lot of Jewish activist groups and Arab activist groups and just, activist groups who care about this issue and want the occupation to end and want Israeli apartheid to end. But I don't think that's necessarily where the solution is going to come from because they don't have influence over U.S. politics yet. I think Israel is an extension of American empire in the Middle East, just like Saudi Arabia is. And until the U.S. stops supporting this racist apartheid state, it's going to continue to be this way. And eventually, I used to think that at some point, it would just be so awful the U.S. wouldn't be able to continue to support a segregationist state, but no one cares anymore. And I think, even in the U.S., Syria, the issue of Syria, the war in Syria fractured even the Palestine solidarity and movement in the U.S. So there isn't even unity in the U.S. among activists around Palestine anymore because they all hate each other over Syria. It's actually really sad.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, your joke earlier about how Biden should run for president of Israel, I mean, it is remarkable watching that clip because the way he was talking about Israel is a way that it's bad and embarrassing enough when a politician talks that way about their own country, like it's this special magical country with, this destiny, if it didn't exist, you'd have to invent it. But he's using it.
It's true. If Israel didn't exist, they would have to invent it, because at the end of the day, like, Israel does act as a sort of like enforcer of American rule in the region. That's its role. And Israel, I mean, I'm talking about sectarian states. Israel was like the original sectarian state in the Middle East.
That's the other thing that's amazing about that, because like when he says, like, it was actually the clip where he's expressing what passes for liberal sentiments about this, that you can't have a Jewish state there, without a two-state solution. There's just no alternative to that. So what's being excluded in there as just unthinkable would be applying what in any other context you'd think of as just like really basic liberal democratic principles that states should represent everybody who lives in their territory, and that it should represent them all equally, and and all of that stuff. That's what's being excluded, that that you could have something that didn't have this special identity and character as an ethno state for the people who are the majority of the citizens of Israel proper.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have a Jewish majority state in an area of the world where not the majority isn't Jewish, unless you have this like brutal occupation with these brutal segregationist militarized rules where there's like laws for different people based on their sect. I mean, that's what you have. And until that dynamic like ends, until support for that ends, as long as you keep hearing Biden talk about the need for a two-state solution so we can have a Jewish state, like, you're just not going to see an end to that. It's going to continue, and it's going to continue to get worse. And, part of my pessimistic view is because how successful Israel has been. Israel has done a phenomenal job at basically mastering like a control of an entire population. Like, Palestinians can't move. They can't go to work. They can't drive. They can't do anything without their movement literally controlled from one place to the next. It's pretty incredible in a really dystopian kind of way. So, there's no Palestinian resistance to it anymore. All of that's been completely pacified. Every resistance, every form of it, whether violent resistance, whether peaceful resistance. And when and even if there is still some peaceful resistance where people are getting shot at the border fence in Gaza, the world just doesn't care.
Did you see the movie Mayor, about the mayor of Ramallah? I strongly recommend that people take it out. It's a documentary that just came out. Actually, it's about like the month when Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem in Ramallah, and it just shows the sort of Kafka-esque comedy in the original sense of the word of human frailty and human failure of what it actually means to be, a government official in the West Bank, and so being suffocated by like settlements around you. And I think it's a really good short but important primer on what this actually is. And one of the things, just building on what Rania said, one of the things that the guy says, it's like, no one really cares. Everyone pretends to care and no one really cares. And I think that's become evident why one of the reasons that I'm so pessimistic about the future of what will happen in Israel-Palestine.
Yeah. So how about I would assume that the answer to the question, Daryl, says, is Biden going to do it? I assume what that means is like moving the embassy back, but I assume that's not happening.
He already said no. Like his administration, they already said at least in rhetoric, Anthony Blinken during his confirmation hearing said no, they would not move the embassy out of Jerusalem. So that's going to stay. I mean, it's mostly a symbolic move anyway, right? It doesn't mean that much. Trump already did it. And they don't, obviously they don't want to pick their fights. But what I do find interesting about
they do want to pick their fights.
The Democrat, well, they do want to pick their fights, but with the Democrat, like the foreign policy establishment, they're still like playing on the sort of like neocon terms. Even when they don't have to, it's like their default position to play on their terms to try and appease people like Lindsey Graham and people like Marco Rubio. Like, I know that these people don't actually, I know that they want to sanction Venezuela. They want a coup in Venezuela, whether Democrat or Republican. That's all.
And they recognize, did we talk about how he recognized Guaido yet?
Not yet. We'll get there. But
Juan Guaido is worth backing. Juan Guaido is an idiot and a failure.
Yeah, actually, one of the best. So yeah, we will. We've got some Venezuelan clips coming up, but they have but I do have to say credit where credit's due. I think that the most insightful thing that Donald Trump ever said was that Juan Guaido was the Beto O'Rourke of Venezuela.
He really looks like
exactly right.
He really looks like oh, by the way, I don't know if I introduced myself, and I'm just saying this because I host the Katie Halper show. I'm saying this because earlier on you mentioned that this is a big week for Daniel Bessner, and I'm like, well, it got even bigger because I'm apparently having him on Thursday too. And Rania, I'm watching Daniel's face that like did not track for a while. Did you forget that we had done that? Or anyway,
I think it's a little bit high, but that's okay.
Okay.
I just look at every day. I take it one day at a time. I'm very sad.
I
wake up.
But also Ben's going to be on regularly, and Rania's been on a bunch. So I'm just reminding people that to support these shows, and also really important to support foreign policy, critical foreign policy voices. So this is a really important show, and also just want to give a shout out to Kevin Gostola, Eugene Puryear, Max Blumenthal, Aaron Mate, Anya Parampil, and
you're gonna make some people mad.
I know, but I was thinking like there are people who I'm thinking of the people who I often ask questions to about this and how marginalized a lot of them are, and it's really important because they actually go to these places and do the work and call them whatever you want. They're still good. So I'm using this space to amplify their voices.
Yes, but then what about all the ones you erased because you forgot to amplify them?
That was like a huge act of erasure.
You're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, like Samantha Power, I should have elevated her. Yeah. Because she is a woman.
Yeah, I think Samantha Power's probably been elevated enough, but
I mean, I also do want to give her a shout out for one of the best things that she said so far is there's this policy. There is now a family identity politics where everyone's excited because, as Samantha Power said about Tony Blinken, it is don't let this get lost. He is a new father. And it's amazing. I'm not kidding. He's a new father. Like, it's amazing to have a working dad in this administration. Like, okay, hold on. First of all, his wife is named Evan. So I think maybe she was trying to woke wash because she mentioned how wonderful Tony and Evan are. And I think he was banking on people thinking Evan is a guy. But also, like, we don't live in a world where men are expected to stay home. When they have kids. So I don't know what weird.
I'm sure Eisenhower had people in his administration, whose wives were taking care of young kids at home.
Yeah,
that's not some sort of representation.
Yeah.
It's so
weird. And also imagine all those new dads who are like newly non-dadded thanks to like all the policies in Libya, right? So like I'm glad someone has their kids around.
No, it's a fundamental problem with all of this humanitarian interventionism. One, it's that people send children not their own. And two, it's to protect children who they often wind up not protecting it. It's a foundational tension to some. I strongly recommend people read Samantha Power's book, or at least my review of it, because this is the type of thing that she is constantly doing this throughout the book about how she's a young mother, how she's a woman, how she's, so concerned with children and blah, 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 blah. And it's in support.
Rwanda. Oh my God. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. In Rwanda, and she's in Bosnia. And not to say, these things are all horrible, right? But it's just totally divorced from the actual realities, or more importantly, the history of what happens in all of these places, and the imperial death machine that she, for some reason, thinks is going to be able to be the savior of the world. It's so weird.
That's a very liberal tactic too. You don't see this so much under Republicans, but this is a very Democratic tactic. They did it all through the Obama years, is really using the humanitarian intervention responsibility to protect dynasty, like that whole tool that Samantha Power is like a huge advocate of.
I do like her for calling Hillary Clinton a monster, right? Didn't she do that?
She called Hillary Clinton a monster?
I think so. Didn't she?
Wait, was it for the right reason or the wrong? Was it like because Hillary Clinton
wrong reason?
Campaign thing. It was during the campaign of 2008 when Power, who had actually volunteered to work in Obama's Senate office, they got connected through Harvard, I believe. But it was during the campaign, and she was being interviewed by, I believe, an Irish or a Scottish journalist, and she said it was a hot mic. Where she basically referred to Hillary as like for a campaign thing, not for any policy.
Oh yeah, obviously, yeah.
She was sidelined on the campaign, and then once he won,
Right.
She was
I mean, Hillary was a monster during that campaign.
She is a monster.
Well, yeah,
Come on.
Hillary-
That's
but it is amazing how little people remember like what that campaign was like. That like she was almost doing proto-Trump stuff.
birther.
To,
She was spreading the birther thing.
Yeah,
Basically.
she did the birther thing. She said
The
that
pastor thing.
that hardworking white people, were her base.
Bill Clinton compared Jesse Jackson winning the primary to a primary in South Carolina to Obama.
She said it that even after Obama had gotten up the delegate threshold, she said, "Well, he could be assassinated."
No. Here's what she said. She refused to drop out, and she was asked, "So you don't buy that party unity stuff?" She goes, "No, I don't. Because my husband didn't get the nomination until June. June, the month that Bobby Kennedy. We all remember what happened to Bobby Kennedy. It was like Bill Clinton knows how to be a terrible person in a very suave way. Hillary Clinton cannot do it. So it was just cringe. She had to apologize because it was very clear that she was basically saying,
she's so stilted.
She's so bad at it. Yeah.
Out much more clearly.
And he just knows how to what is it? You can turn a sow's ear into silk or something, like this old expression, probably comes from Arkansas, honestly. But yeah, he definitely she was basically saying, I can't drop out because, Bobby Kennedy was killed. And of course, implicit in that is the fact that Obama was required more security than any other candidates. Obviously, there was so many death threats. There were so many death threats against him, thanks to the combination of racism and Islamophobia. And then Bill Clinton was asked about this. Sorry, I don't mean to go down the Clinton rabbit hole. I'll just wrap it up quickly. But Bill Clinton was asked about whether he regretted the Jesse Jackson comments, and he said no, he didn't, and that the campaign was playing the race card. And then he said that on the radio, okay? He said that on radio, and it wasn't lost or burned in a fire. It was transmitted onto the radio. And then the next day, he was asked on camera, which also was not in a fire. So all of this documentation exists. He was asked on camera what he meant when he said that they were playing the race card. And he said, when did I say that? And to whom did I say that? So again, he gets away with it, kind of, and Hillary doesn't because she's not. And no, this is not a sexism issue. She's not a good liar, and he is. Yeah,
which is amazing because I'm told the post-truth era didn't start until 2016. So
yeah, it's true. They were pioneers.
Yeah, there we go.
Why are you erasing the Clintons? Both her as a woman, and he is, of course, of the not non-rich person. So yeah,
cut to this video being shown in a re-education camp.
They're such bad people.
They're so bad. They both do this thing, but again,
they are monstrous people. I mean,
yeah, they are.
Obviously.
That's unfair to monsters, Ben.
Yeah, Clinton. Welfare reform was a humanitarian, disaster for many single mothers and it was that was really disturbing Dickensian stuff that's been largely memory hold. And then of course the overseas monstrousness was on an entirely different level. I mean, Madeleine Albright, as Clinton's Secretary of State, famously said, she was asked point blank, 500,000 Iraqi children have died because of the sanctions. Is it worth it? And she said, yeah, it's worth it. That was the Clinton administration, and then of course off the clock he's just flying around with Jeffrey Epstein. So I mean, this
right, and on the clock flying around to execute a mentally disabled black man, Ricky Ray Rector.
And you wonder why so many people are willing to believe crazy conspiracies about them.
This is what in that. That episode that's dropping for patrons on Thursday, but we already recorded it with Daniel and Amber Frost. Talking about their Jacobin piece.
Excellent article, by the way. I read that. The Jacobin article, very, very good.
Yeah. Sad to report, but
I mean, it was very good, and that's a point they make in there that I mean, it's not hard to see where people could get the idea that it sounds plausible that you'd have an international cabal of pedophiles involving powerful and well-connected people. They got the details wrong, but
Chris Christmas was on my show saying this the other day, how at least Q people, they do some work, they put some work into it. It's more believable than Hillary Clinton and Nancy Pelosi saying that they wanted to see Trump's phone records to see if he was on the phone with Putin during the storming of the Capitol.
You know what's crazy about the
Isn't that
storming of the
insane?
Capitol? You know what's crazy
They
about the
said that
storming
out
of
loud on a podcast, on Hillary Clinton's podcast. Did you guys hear about this? It's insane.
Yeah. No, but what was crazy, what I think the craziest part about the storming of the Capitol to me, or the part that I'll continue to wonder or think about, it will continue to come up in my mind, is like the fear that all those Democratic lawmakers and some Republican lawmakers felt because of the rioters outside. And they should feel fear. Those people were really scary, right? And they were like calling for hanging Mike Pence or whatever. But I won't comment on whether that's a good news. Moving on. My point is that so many of those Democratic lawmakers are so supportive of those kinds of like that same sort of sentiment and like rioting and like attacking government officials in adversary countries. And sometimes we fund them and support them. And the reason so you just put up a comment that somebody who was watching noted about Gaddafi. The U.S. intervened in Libya and literally through NATO gave air cover to a bunch of extremists who murdered this guy on camera, with a bayonet. And it was really brutal. She laughed about it. And so it's just like really jarring to me to like see that sort of behavior and then the horror they feel when even lesser versions. Like I wouldn't even call the people who were outside the Capitol anywhere near the people who were armed in Libya and shoving a bayonet.
No, certainly not.
Literally.
I mean, look, I wrote an article with Daniel about about January 6th and why we didn't think that like it was reasonable or sane to say that that it was like literally a threat to like end democracy and impose fascism or something. That wouldn't have happened. But you could have totally had murders of lawmakers. That could have happened, then, but then, I think that somebody, I'm sure somebody could say, oh, but that's totally different because because this
It's right when they did it over there.
There's a lot of that.
The way that they would do it is by saying, well, the difference is the U.S. is democracy, but then like you could say, but then you can, and I do want to do Iran before we move off to the Middle East, but I mean, just complete the thought. That certainly, especially when you start looking at Latin America, there's not only a long history of us doing that to other countries that are democracies, but a very recent one. People always want to like portray that as ancient Cold War history, but they. Yeah, right. But I mean, right. But the same way that, Chile happened in 1973 or, Guatemala in 54, the attempted coup against Chavez in Venezuela happened in 2002. The one against the democratically elected Zelaya, the president of Honduras.
Which we did not declare. What was that? 2008? Was that? When was that?
2011.
Yeah, which we did with Hillary would not declare a coup. Would not declare a coup and lied about the reasons. Yeah.
But this is amazing. In the first edition of her memoir, like her second memoir, the one that came out around then, in the first edition, she actually bragged about like diplomatic negotiations to make sure that this left-wing strongman Zelaya wasn't allowed to come back to power. And then the second edition.
Wasn't a very good strongman if it was that easy to take him out.
I know, right? It seems like a weak man. But,
in his pajamas, they took him in his pajamas.
But then in the second edition, she removes that passage with no explanation. It's like 1984. Just goes down the memory hole.
And the media didn't investigate. Like nobody looked into it and asked why. The media that actually has access to her never asked her why.
They couldn't care less, or they didn't know. Yeah. Can you imagine someone asking her, like, why did you remove that part? I mean, it's like.
Do you guys remember when she was like during the election against Bernie in 2016? At one point, or maybe it was in 2015, she was like, we have to send them back so that their parents stop.
We have to send a message. We have to send a message. Christiana Amanpour asked her about kids coming across the border. And what should be done with them, and she's like, "Yeah, we have to send them back to where they came from because we have to send a message." And of course, Amo Bernie was like, "These are kids. Who are you going to send a message to? These are children." But that was wonderful.
Right? No, and obvious, which by the way is incredibly illegal because the almost all of them had at least a prima facie plausible claim to refugee status.
They were fleeing Honduras. A third of those children were from Honduras.
Yeah,
but that was the most disgusting part of it.
Yeah,
they were fleeing the disaster that she participated in causing.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, which makes that particularly. And yeah, actually, just to since we're talking about the monstrousness of Hillary Clinton, there's also one of the things that came out of the WikiLeaks, the State Department cables, was that while she was Secretary of State, the State Department was lobbying the Haitian government against raising the minimum wage to, I think, what would have been about $5 an hour, $5 a day, is what it would have raised it to. And this is also happening in yet another recent example. Jean-Bertrand Aristide was democratically elected, and he was literally taken out of the country by U.S. Marines in 2004. So what people were afraid of happening at the Capitol has happened, and then much more so in lots of places that do have democratic governments. But I do want to.
But it's altruism because we're doing it to other countries. That's the difference.
And it's obviously we just listed. Can you believe that there's actually this common belief among the establishment that we actually do good in the world? Like all of the disasters and destruction that we've talked about in just the last hour.
Well, the media
just foreign policy, such a destructive country.
What's really interesting is that I've been thinking that a lot of people actually believe in it less. I think I'm actually publishing a piece about the game Call of Duty, which is about the Cold War. But what's really interesting is that it's actually super critical of the United States. And the game is? It's like, the United States is rapacious and horrible and does all these things and blah, 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 which is surprising. But it's related to this in that the game doesn't believe in American empire, right? But the game can't imagine something different. And I think that's the situation where we're at. Mark Fisher had his capitalist realism. You can't imagine a world outside of capitalism. I think many elites...
Imperial realism.
Right. Yeah. What I'm imperial realism. You can't imagine a world outside of the American empire. And I think that's actually where we're at. And in some sense, that's even more grotesque than the 1990s when at least Madeleine Albright really thought the U.S. would bring peace and prosperity. I don't even think Joe Biden, whatever's left up there, thinks that any longer.
Yeah, well, it's like, do you ever watch that movie American Made? Do you remember this?
Yeah, of course. We've talked about it.
What is
it? We talked about it. Okay, I have a scene. Here, I was accusing Danny of being high earlier. I'm clearly
losing it. Well, you did say we were elders at the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, which is an amazing movie, right? So this came out a few years ago. It's a fun movie, but it's the thing about it is, so it's Tom Cruise playing this real guy.
Yeah, the one about
Barry Steele, who's this CIA pilot, who was also with the sort of collusion of both, working for the cartels, in both supporting the Contras and, bringing drugs back. And the thing that I found amazing about this movie is that we've gotten to the point, and this goes to Danny's point about how the sort of decline of belief in the sort of innate goodness of American foreign policy, that it's a very mainstream Hollywood movie. I mean, this Tom Cruise was in it, but it was just sort of matter of factly. It's oh yeah, remember when we were running drugs in Latin America to support death squads? That's the thing that happened. That's it's just oh yeah, no, that's a funny little detail about the 1980s. That we did that.
Well, it's interesting. The idea is that we did it right against communism. I think that's a really good point about this sense that the U.S. has to be in charge or else. And that's really what not to bring it back to China, but that is what the China fear is about. If we're not in charge, China will be in charge. And we just assume American elites assume that the Chinese are have the same sort of drive and desires that the American empire does. When China's actually not an empire, it doesn't do imperialism, at least not the way America does. It doesn't try to impose its system of governance and its system in general on other countries. China will work with whoever. It's not the U.S. has conditions, right? They're you have to be capitalist, you have to implement austerity, and you have to support the Israelis. That's kind of how the U.S. functions. We won't be your ally unless you do these things. Whereas China's it doesn't matter if you're socialist, it doesn't matter if you're we'll work with Cuba, we'll work with Iran, which is not a socialist country, but we'll also work with Israel, and we'll work with Russia.
Yeah, I mean, I think China might be the imperial-ish thing about China is it might be interest being regionally hegemonic, but it's certainly not interested.
That's different. That's different, though. That's different than wanting to like expand.
Have
Like the U.S. is
global,
an empire.
This
It's
is
just
like
a different. I mean, it's just a different system. Like the
This
U.S.
is my-
is.
this is my whole theory, because I do think Ben, I think I talked about it with you before, that the United States is almost unique in its universalism, and that's because of Christianity, which like the Christian reaction that founded this country is like hyper universalistic and hyper Christianity. And when you look at Americans trying to sort of examine what other states are doing, you get people like George Kennan saying Marxism, Leninism want to take on the world. Stalin never thought he could dominate the world. That's like a purely American insanity. And I think the same thing right now is happening with Xi. The United States, I agree with Ben, they want to be regionally hegemonic. They do not want to have any challenge from Vietnam or Japan.
You mean China? You said the United States.
Sorry. With any of those powers or India, I think that's actually going to be the next big thing. I think the next big regional conflict is going to be between India and China, already clashing in Pakistan, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But so they want to be regionally hegemonic, but that's not the pure craziness of the U.S. universalism. 700.
It's an extension of European colonialism. It's basically but it's the roots of European colonialism. That's what America is, right? It's like that, like you said, you mentioned Christianity, that sort of like crusader colonialist drive to like expand and suck up and own everything. It's capitalism too.
Yeah, I would say it's a Protestant colonialism. It's not like a Catholic colonialism. Like there were differences between the Spanish empires and other empires, but I think like this particular form of like 17th century British religion has.
I mean, mercenary versus missionary, kind of missionary versus mercenary.
Yeah, and exactly. Yeah, there's a missionary aspect in it for sure. And I think that missionary aspect, I think that culture became essentially mainstream liberal secularism. This historian David Hollinger actually writes about how like that culture, but I do think it's become instantiated in how Americans view their role in the world due to the Cold War, where you get this fight against godless communism, and it provided this particular form of thing, a series of institutions to dominate the world. And this is why we get this peculiar universalism that Americans impose on other nations when they don't actually.
It's like the but yeah, I think the distinction, it's like the Noam Chomsky line about the Cold War, that the Soviet Union was regional gangster, but the U.S. was the global gangster. That even when the Soviet Union was doing, like Khrushchev was invading Hungary or whatever, it wasn't.
It's like its own backyard, and actually, I think most countries, most powerful countries, behave that way. That's relatively normal behavior, is to want to influence the people around you and to want to kind of like dominate and be, hegemonic
in your particular area. But it's a relatively unique disease to try to dominate.
Global dominance. It's like sort of global. Yeah.
But I also do think that there's something that I think we should talk about or mention, which is that as like, what's the Tom Cruise movie called again? American Made. And then Dan, you mentioned a game. And I do think that there's often a kind of realism of like a deceptive realism that we think of as somewhat refreshing because it just like names it. But that is another way to normalize things. And I think that we see this a lot with, like, I often think of the difference between an American Jewish Zionist and I'm an American Jew, by the way, and an Israeli Zionist. I know. So you don't, and an Israeli Zionist, and like the Jewish Zionists, like liberal Zionists, often will be like, they wanted to leave, they didn't want to stay there, and it's like totally revisionist narrative of how Israel was founded. Whereas Israelis are like, yeah, it was ethnic cleansing, and if we'd done more, it wouldn't be a problem today. Like with Benny Morris himself, right, who documented ethnic cleansing and then went on to say that we should be bombing Iran, right? But like there is, and I think there's like an embrace of badassery that can happen, and I think we see that with Israelis a lot, and that I think with movies like American Made, you do too. And it's almost like patting. It's like, yeah, we're badass, and it was such ugly history, but it's kind of cool also.
Yeah,
I'm not saying
enough.
it is. I'm saying there's like
this would take us in a different direction, but Katie, that's also related to Jewish masculinity after the Holocaust.
You think?
A lot going on there. A lot going on there.
You have to like rebirth, like re-envision.
Yeah, the cowering Ashkenazi guy praying in the corner as his
not like the weak ghetto Jews who let themselves be put in cattle cars.
Exactly, right.
Strong,
the bronze.
And that was actually Israel just very. I'll shut up.
Made it now everybody has to be bronze gods like me and Danny, but yeah.
Right, yeah.
for you. But Israel made a concerted effort in the 50s and the 60s to like hire a bunch of public relations firms to basically project this image into the world. So like this, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of interesting sort of links here between that. Consent and imperialism and all that stuff.
Yeah, and they are the proto woke. They were woke before anyone else was woke because they were grounded in trauma, and they got to use that a lot. No, it's true. They did. I mean, I'm not. I think it's stupid to not understand. You can be critical of the founding of Israel without dismissing why it happened, which I think is like a thing that the left needs to do more of. Anyway. Yeah.
Zionism did so much like remaking of the region too, because it also took all of these Arab Jews that lived in all of these Middle Eastern countries, and it completely erased their history and like projected European Jewish culture onto that. Like it forced European Jewish culture onto them.
Yeah, but it's weird because it also, like Dan was saying, it was a weird thing. It was like self-loathing, but like culturally hegemonic Ashkenazi, but also trying to appear Sephardic. Like it was almost
Sephardic is like strong and like, you know, brooding and like, you know, uses their hands to work.
They work the land. Yeah.
But it's also interesting. It's also interesting how there are these like whenever you see these videos of like these you know, because a lot of working class Israeli Jews are like of Arab descent, a significant number of them, I think a majority. And so sometimes they happen to also be the most hateful of Palestinians. So you'll see these like anti-Arab, like videos of anti-Arab rallies in like Jerusalem. And they're just like, you know, saying like Arabs are savages. And I'm like, do you see what you
look at your
like?
face? Yeah.
Like you look like you could be my cousin. Like what the hell? Like, so it's actually quite sad though. It like there used to be a lot of in Lebanon and Syria in Iraq.
I mean, in the Ottoman Empire, the Mizrahi Jews got along. I mean, they were a part of the structure in a real serious way, and it's just, you know, horrible European colonialism.
It took away a huge, like Zionism took away like a huge chunk of the Middle East, because Jews were also in the Middle East. They were part of like you know, they were like a part of they were lawyers and doctors, and they were
really Rania and accountants. What else?
They were
really.
They were part of the professional class. Like they were tradesmen, and like it was like part of it was like a brain drain.
Yeah,
I can't help it. Right?
Fair enough. So you mentioned
bargain hunters.
So Katie mentioned bombing Iran a few minutes ago, and before we leave the Middle East, you know, I do want to touch on that because, you know, we were talking at the beginning of the episode about how so much of what Biden has done, you know, in the first, you know, week, I guess, of his term has been, and, you know, this is good as far as it goes, which is not very far, but it's good as far as it goes, has been about reversing a bunch of things that Trump has done. I mean, the criticism, of course, is that it's just restoring the January 19th, 2017 status quo, which is what led to Trump. But, you know, it has done a lot to reverse that status quo. But one exception, as far as I can tell, is that it doesn't really seem like there's a lot of sign that Biden is in any great rush to restore actually the most important diplomatic accomplishment of the Biden administration, which is the Iran deal.
Yeah, which he's not which he could just re-implement without conditions, but he's not doing that, which is very scary and very dangerous because, as you said, it's not even a return to the status quo that was, you know, facilitated by the president to whom he was vice president.
So I know a lot of the people, I don't know them personally, but I know through people I know who know them, that a lot of the people that Biden has put in place of like the foreign policy realm really want to go back to the Iran deal. Anthony Blinken has a very personal like desire to go back to it because he's like attached to it because he spent time negotiating it, right? They like these people like lost sleep over it. So they do want to go back to some sort of deal, but there's also this weird like desire to appease neocons still. Like they don't want to look soft, right? Like I mentioned this earlier, Democrats, like even, you know, centrist Dems have this like really weird psychological problem where they're always trying to appeal to the right. Like if you watch that confirmation hearing, Anthony Blinken was like promising Lindsey Graham, I will talk to you first. I mean, part of that was probably just so that like he would confirm him. But also I think he kind of means that. Like they don't want neocons to be sad. They don't want the Israel lobby to be sad. Like they don't want to be attacked by them. And I'm like, who cares? Like you actually do have a mandate after 4 disastrous years of Trump to go in and renegotiate this deal. And you're not doing it. I mean, there was also some positive talk. I don't know if it's true that they're considering like sanctions exemptions due to COVID, like relief due to COVID immediately, but also that no one said anything about that publicly. Like in the middle of a global pandemic, the US is sanctioning countries to a disaster, like devastating degree. Iran has experienced the highest numbers in the region, highest death toll, and their medical sector has like been collapsing the last year, and they can't get like medical equipment and drugs they need because of US sanctions. And in some cases, vaccines. It's becoming a problem with getting vaccines too. So yeah, it's been pretty so far not looking good.
Couldn't they just like reinstate them, the deal with Iran, as opposed to demanding that Iran guarantee certain things, which is what they're doing now?
But they don't want to. They've even said they want to use the attempt to negotiate to get Iran to make concessions. But with sanctions, it's a little bit different because they can renegotiate a deal, but Treasury sanctions take a really long time to undo. There's like all this legalistic BS that goes along with it. You can't undo those overnight. Like I don't even know. I don't know if that's accurate, but I'm pretty sure that like it takes.
Yeah, I think one of the important things in the coming years, you've already seen sort of echoes of this, but it needs to become the mainstream left position that economic sanctions are absolutely horrible and are as worse a form of warfare as anything. And I think that's coming. But, let's say if Bernie won the administration, I think he would have seen calls on the left for sanctions against different regimes and things like that. So I think it needs to become, we need to start building towards the consensus position. Is it's as bad as troops on the ground. It is destructive. It destroys lives.
I'm living them. Not to the I'm in Lebanon. Lebanon, it doesn't have as severe sanctions as say Syria or Iran does, but I see the consequences of these sanctions every day. It's awful what it does to regular people. Like you can't access medical treatment because of like lack of devices, because they literally can't get equipment. Like you can't make basic bank transfers. You can't get your money. Like your money has been like, it devalues the local currency so dramatically that overnight your income goes from something stable that you can like live on to nothing. Like it just destroys livelihoods in a way that is, people even say, is worse than war. It gives people no future. Everyone tries to emigrate. It causes like huge brain drain. Doctors leave. So yeah, that does need to become a position of the left. I feel like in general, the left in the U.S. really doesn't care that much about foreign policy because there's so much like domestically that needs to change. But I really think that we need to do a better job of like linking those two things.
Right. Also, especially because a lot of money goes into the Pentagon.
Well, exactly. That's one thing, right? Is a lot of money goes into the Pentagon that should be spent on things like Medicare for all. We shouldn't have this huge bloated budget that, causes us to have this like military industrial complex that literally lives off of needing war. But more than that, I think that the last 4 years of Trump really showed this, is like, you can't have an empire without it affecting the country domestically. Like the things that the US does abroad, especially financially, it does to itself. Like all of the austerity and awful trade deals that we've pushed on the rest of the world that have like, impoverished people and destroyed livelihoods, we literally do it like domestically to ourselves. All of that comes back. Like and I think Trump was really an example of bringing that war home internally in a really dramatic way. And we're going to see more of that. Like you have to care about foreign policy. These things are so connected. And also it's a huge distraction because whenever we have some boogeyman, like an evil boogeyman that we all need to be scared of, and we have to beef up the national security state, it's like everything becomes about that. And it takes all of the energy and all of the wind out of like campaigns for, a more equitable policies domestically. Like it's just,
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Add just importance. I think Rania's right. I agree with it. And then we at home, what we need to do is sort of attack the weak points of these empires. So, for example, just last summer, Congress refused, including basically every Democrat, refused to reduce the defense budget. It's $740 billion by 10%. And that's because they have various interests being organized to protect these things. So it's actually very, very slippery because, a lot of people will do it because defense factories have jobs or things like that. And, so these are very complex issues that I don't think point to easy answers, but it's important, something we all need to know about.
Yeah, I mean, it is easy in some ways, right? Like we can't, it just requires some finessing and some demands. I think that like we get so stuck in this like technocratic marsh of how are we going to do it? We just can't help it. I'm not saying you're doing that, Daniel, but I'm just saying that is like part of the things that we have to unpack. And I do think one of the things that Bernie was so good about Bernie was that he really like normalized outrage and exposed the abnormality of the status quo. And so we got to keep doing that. And, then this is we have to have another.
Because he expressed that outrage in that, rhetorical style comment to those lawyers and accountants and hagglers.
I know. I call that tradition. That's a crotchety mensch. That's the allegory of the crotchety mensch. I'm naming it. I've said it before, but I've never said it was an allegory. So that's what it is. Yeah.
All right. Well, in terms of to go back to someone who's much less of a mensch, Joe Biden, I think we have a clip of Biden talking about Venezuela and Florida.
God, yeah.
We also need to rebuild our ability to work with our partners throughout the Western Hemisphere to realize the enormous potential of this region and the world, to confront those leaders who continue to oppress the rights of their people. We should be leading the international effort to confront the massive humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. Maduro, who I've met, is a dictator, plain and simple. And he's causing incredible suffering among the Venezuelan people to maintain his grip on power. The Venezuelan people need our support to recover their democracy and rebuild their country. That's why I would immediately grant temporary protective status to Venezuelans as president, so the Republicans in the Senate can't keep blocking it like they did again just last week. And I'll make sure we're supporting neighboring countries that are being overrun with immigration because of Maduro, like Colombia, which are caring for millions of Venezuelans who fled their country in desperation. I'll use sanctions as one of the tools for a comprehensive strategy that includes humanitarian assistance, international pressure, and support for democratic actors in Venezuela to force the regime to embark on the road to a free and fair election. We also need a new Cuba policy. The administration's approach is not working. Cuba is no closer to freedom and democracy than it was 4 years ago. The fact there's more political prisoners, the secret police are as brutal as ever, and Russia is once again a major presence in Cuba and Havana.
Not Russia. What's really annoying about everything he just said is the U.S. is like best friends with Colombia, which is a right-wing narco government that is literally participating in the murder of activists, like social activists.
Yeah, like one of the highest murder rates for labor organizers.
Yeah,
right?
like in the last year, like over like hundreds have been killed with the complicity of the government. And Honduras is literally a narco state. That's what people are fleeing Honduras. Like, it's just people are fleeing Venezuela because of your sanctions. You destroyed their economy. Like, they're going to Colombia because they need work.
Yeah, and if you're going to say like, oh, it's not really the the sanctions, it's really this or that that the Maduro government has done, then hey, let's at least lift the sanctions so we can test that.
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, let's find out. Let's find out if it's the government or your sanctions. Also, the word dictatorship, like I think. There are a lot of adversary countries that are dictatorships. I do not believe that Venezuela is one of them. I think it's the most outrageous claim.
Yeah.
Constantly say the brutal Maduro dictatorship.
Well, Bernie Sanders actually took some
tyrant. He said a tyrant, brutal tyrant.
He called Chavez a brutal tyrant.
No, he called Maduro.
So he did do that. Although he also took some heat in the early stages of the primary because he wouldn't say dictator.
Right.
Like,
Right. It's a tyrant.
That's the magic word that you have to be willing to say. What was the quote that you pulled up for us?
Right, so the quote that I pulled up is from Blinken's Senate hearing, and
is that you, Katie?
Yeah,
and during it, he says that Biden would seek to more effectively target sanctions on the country, which aim to oust President Maduro, who retains control of the country. He said the new administration would look at more humanitarian assistance, and then on top of that, during that is when he said that Biden will recognize Guaido as the interim president of Venezuela.
Yeah.
Guaido,
Amazing.
I don't know if anyone's from New York City, but like watching this, but Guaido looks so much like a Catholic school kid who wears a big backpack running for the bus. It's just, I mean, this is not anti-Catholic, but it is like, Dan, you're from New York City, right? You know what I'm talking about? The guy's wearing the navy blazers.
Yeah. No, I know exactly what you're talking about. The big backpack, because he has to have the Bible and stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
To me, he looks like a douchey frat boy who's like always on cocaine. Like that dude's always high. If you zoom into his pupils. That guy is always coked up. He always looks like he's been snorting coke, like all the time.
I mean, he can just go across the border to where the people are fleeing, right?
Just go to Colombia and get some cocaine.
Yeah, I mean, and it is also amazing that after months of this big issue about it being terrible, and it was bad, that the Republicans wouldn't recognize Biden's victory in the election.
Yeah.
And they're trying to get the guy who lost the election to somehow be able to keep power. Guaido, I mean, didn't even run for president. He's like, I mean, there's no basis of like there's nobody voted for him for this office. The assembly did, but they're not actually constitutionally empowered to do that.
Not a single Venezuelan cast a vote for Guaido for president.
Yeah,
like, that's an accurate statement.
Yeah, right. And but you're still saying no. We get to decide that that this whatever criticisms you have, and I agree dictatorship would be going way too far. But whatever criticisms you have of insufficient democracy in Venezuela, what would be even less democratic?
I don't think the U.S.
Venezuelan voted for president.
Right. I don't even think the U.S. gets to make the criticism. Like, it's so absurd to me that any U.S. official thinks that they have the moral high ground to decide what is and isn't a democracy when look at their freaking allies.
But I think that's Ben's point, which is like, even by the own ridiculous police of the world, which we don't buy into, but even with that as being your moral basis, which again everyone on the show rejects, even that is just so incoherent when you are trying to elevate someone who was not democratically elected. Just pick a narrative.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like if they had brought Paul Ryan back or somebody to run the House, and then suddenly the U.S. was like, "That's our president now." Nobody really voted for him, but he's in charge of the House, so that's the guy.
That actually is a good equivalent. Or it's kind of like that time that Pete Buttigieg declared himself the winner.
Oh my God! Yeah, but at least he actually ran and did get some votes. Not a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right. Pete Buttigieg did almost.
Right.
So it is slightly less ridiculous, but it is also actually my favorite thing about the Guaido thing is that I don't know how brutal a tyrant Maduro could be, because Guaido spent months going around to military bases saying, "Follow me, I'm the real president."
Right, and there were a lot of protests there. I thought, why did he
walk around doing that? Imagine what would happen.
In America, that guy would be in a prison cell.
Yeah.
Could you imagine if someone in the U.S. was running around trying to literally incite a coup from members of the military? What would happen to them in America? And this guy was just walking around totally freely. But the thing is, you got to think behind closed doors. The Biden people have got to be like, man, how do we get out of this Guaido thing? This guy is pathetic. I know obviously they want a puppet, but they can't possibly like him for real.
Well,
he's so bad at it.
The Trump administration was doing that. The Trump administration was doing that. The Trump administration was pretty much behind closed doors saying, how do we get out of Guaido? That's when the Trump Beto O'Rourke comment came out. Was because Trump was trying to reverse that and find pretty much anybody else to be his puppet Venezuelan leader.
Guy's pathetic. And he's also like openly corrupt. Like he doesn't even pretend not to be. He's just like trying to steal money from the Venezuelan oil company that the US basically took the assets, like stole the assets of. I mean, him and his whole crew are just like making millions. Well, they don't even do what they're like. It's just pathetic as like a puppet. Worst puppets in history.
Fair enough. So before we wrap up, I think that talked about Venezuela, where in some sense it seems like Biden's actually amping up the attempts to undermine Maduro and impose Guaido.
Maybe he'll find like a trans woman in Venezuela to be. That would be like the request to do it. that could be the self-declared president, and then we can all get behind it because it'll be super woke.
Anybody that says no to the coup is transphobic now.
Yeah, seriously.
Oh my God, I can imagine that. But then, like the other thing.
And by the way, another term I patented is woke washing, which is when you use identity politics to kind of launder the fact that you actually have an evil person in power.
I think I edited the woke washing clip.
There you go. Yeah. With Brianna Joy Gray and Rania Khalek right here.
Yeah, that was one of the first clips I edited for you.
There you go. Yeah. Thanks, Forrest, for your editing. International mystery man of the editing left. Yeah.
I didn't even know that you were the man behind that. Well done.
Edit, yeah.
Nice. But what about China? So it seems so that's another thing where it's a little unclear that Biden even really wants to go back to the pre-Trump status quo, at least to me.
Oh, he doesn't. His team, I mean, they're like the China hawks. I mean, that's just the trajectory of U.S. foreign policy. It's almost like it doesn't matter who's in charge. And I think that the Biden administration will probably be more effective. I do think there is like a certain contingency of people who seem to think that Biden's going to be close to China. I don't think that's true at all.
Oh, like the Trump. Yeah. The Trump.
Yeah. Like the Trump people, like we're like Biden's good. That's not even a little bit true. And also, before they left, Mike Pompeo declared the China's treatment of Uyghurs to be genocide. And whatever you think about that, that's a huge like escalation rhetorically in like the diplomatic realm for the US to do that. Like China and the US are totally on this really, I don't know if it'll continue under Biden, the level of diplomatic hawkishness, but something that we've seen from China for the first time since I can remember is even their diplomats are kind of like trolling the US. Chinese diplomats didn't used to do that. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. Chinese diplomats used to be very like reserved and, calm. And now they're just like totally like trolling the US online with their Twitter accounts. It's kind of unprecedented and a little bit funny.
Yeah. Which doesn't mean, again, it's like you can have a criticism of China's treatment of Uyghurs, but that doesn't mean that like it's ever a good thing for the United States to be ratcheting up any kind of like belligerent discourse with any country, including China. And of course, it's obviously super hypocritical.
I also think it's very important. I also think it's very important, though, to like that because everybody wants to say obviously China's not a perfect country. No question. They have human rights issues. They're not exactly like they don't have the same political freedoms that we have in the US. I don't really care so much because that's China's issue, but we do also have to. It's like we have to interrogate where certain information is coming from.
Yeah, well, it's a disproportionate focus.
Something shady is going on with the way China is treating Uyghurs. However, some of the more extreme claims, like organ harvesting and like things that there literally is no evidence for, except for like this one guy in Germany who's like a right-wing Christian fundamentalist and has also said anti-Semitic things.
Yeah,
there's this guy, Adrian, like we also like shouldn't be scared to point out where the State Department is getting its claims from. And I think there is a fear on the left of doing that because the left has been so beaten down over the decades for like being an apologist for this or that dictator or like not taking human rights violations seriously enough. The left is scared of being called genocide and dictator apologists. I'm not saying to deny or apologize.
Well, honestly, if we're being honest, I just want to say something for myself. Like, I actually feel it's a bit the opposite. Like, I feel like I can have, and I get it. I think that like, I'm just going to be honest. Sometimes like I do feel like nuance can be a bit of a privilege. Like it depends who we're talking to. But I would say that, like, yes, do I think that the media very much vilifies certain countries and regimes? And do I think that's dangerous because they're doing that to like massage the public into being war ready? I do. I also don't I think among friends on the left, I get frustrated in the opposite direction, where I get where it's coming from, but it's like, we can acknowledge that there are bad things that happen in countries, and that doesn't mean that we should have regime change. And it also doesn't mean that people in the media, and this is the biggest part, I think, people in the media who are highlighting that, like Jake Tapp or whatever, are total hypocrites. They have no universal standards, and everything they're doing is in the service of the State Department.
Yeah.
Well, it's like when I think of remember, the Kuwait, the Iraq, Kuwait,
right? The lies about
an incubator, being thrown in an incubator.
I was thinking about that earlier, right?
Yeah.
Which is a good example because Saddam Hussein really was this.
He was a monster,
extremely repressive, monstrous dictator. Killed tons of Kurds and Iraqi communists.
He was also our friend. He was also our friend.
Yeah.
Right.
But also the incubator thing was obviously bullshit. And so
we killed many more people because of what we did there.
And because of that lie was used as like a justification and a basis. And that's why I feel it isn't we shouldn't necessarily shy away.
Right. But I guess I think we could be honest about it. Like, I totally get it. But I think we can be honest about what's going on in another country. And also,
I agree.
Because
I agree. I guess I see the other side of it. And maybe this is me also having this is me also reacting to covering Syria.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, the Syria stuff makes me want to make okay, I'm ready. Everyone's going to cancel me. No, but the Syria stuff is so one-sided that all it's that. If you want any honest discussion about Syria, then you need to actually engage in what the point of talking about Syria is, because nobody will ever do that. And it's a lot like the Iraq argument, right? And the media does not allow for any space of any discussion where you can acknowledge the bad things that are done in certain countries. Because if you're doing that, all you're doing is putting more weight on one side, which is, again, a pro-war narrative.
Well, but I think it is also important. Obviously, there's a balance. You don't want to fall for the equivalent of the incubators thing. They're out there false or misleading propaganda is super common in these contexts. But also it going the other way and sort of being a conspiracy theorist about every piece of information about, some terrible thing that some regime that happens to have come into conflict with American empire is doing is not helpful. It's not politically helpful because it doesn't make you a more effective.
I don't see that being the problem. I don't see that being the problem on the left, though. I see the opposite. I wish that was the problem. If that would be easier to deal with, actually.
Well, and I also think what happens is there's an overcompensation in the service of time. I'm not even kidding. In the service of time and space, where it's everything is so in one direction that. What is the value of even every word that we put into an article? I think I'm saying something that obviously is going to get me in trouble, but I think we shouldn't underestimate how coordinated and unfounded so many things are that are said by the quote unquote mainstream media, and how things are called conspiracy theories that turn out to be actually just theories that are not theories. They are descriptions of things. And so, we do have to there's the Chomsky position, right? Which is well, let's focus on the stuff that our own government is doing that's bad. We can condemn other governments. But I do think that the left does spend a lot of time. And I also think if we wanted to have a more nuanced conversation, that would require the media actually doing anything but reciting talking points from, which it really does.
Capitalist media, we can't have capitalist controlled media. And we'll never get good coverage under capitalist control media. And that's
I actually had that was one of the first articles that I wrote for Jacobin. It was called "Free Press is Too Important to Trust Capitalists With," which as I remember Michael Brooks pointing out at the time is a terrible headline. It should have been, "Free press is too important to trust the free market." That's just such an obvious, better word.
Really,
but yeah.
Sure. Just let me very briefly plug a book by Sam Leibovitz called Free Speech and Unfree News. And it shows how in the 30s and 40s, the idea that a free news was a news free of government control and why that took hold in the United States. And it opens up new space for thinking of new models about what a post-capitalist press might look like. So just want to highlight that.
Nice.
That sounds
Okay,
like a
of
dream.
course, there's a Venezuela super chat question we missed earlier.
Yeah. All right. So the question is, how far do y'all think the Biden administration will take regime change measures in Venezuela, especially now that the EU is not recognizing Guaido as a leader?
I actually think, and this is like, I'm usually really pessimistic, but I think that the Biden administration is gonna like try to lessen the temperature a little bit with Venezuela, with like trying to regime change Venezuela, at least for a little bit.
I agree. I don't think the people who he's appointed are going to want to focus on Latin America.
Yeah.
There's a great line in The Best and the Brightest by Halper, Sam, where he's like, within the foreign policy establishment, Latin America was always considered like a place for second-rate minds. And my guess is that prejudice still holds in a lot of the American foreign policy establishment. So the people are going to want to go out there. They're going to want to make a big thing, and they're not going to use the sort of GOP anti-Chavez playbook from George Bush in 2004. I think they're going to cool down Venezuela and really refocus on, my guess would be Europe and China, actually, and Asia in general.
Yeah, there's actually, it keeps going back to China, but there really is a tug of war starting to happen with Europe, not just with China, but with Russia. Especially after Trump, like there's European countries that have started to have warmer, better relations with Russia. There's also fear of this person who Angela Merkel, her like successor, her likely successor, has like been not pro-Russia, but wants better diplomatic relations with Russia, and that's starting to freak out all of like the pro-Western Europeans. And also like Europe's been making all these like business deals with China, and the US is really pissed off about it. So I think you're right about this like focus on Europe.
Great power competition is back, Matt. It's going to be great power competition. It's not going to be these small, unimportant states. Geopolitics is going to, my guess, is going to be what's going to really get the Biden administration going in that first year.
Yeah, and I think that that in that context where the China stuff is more important than I think what Katie and Rania were talking about earlier about what whether some people on the left err in the direction of denying denying bad things that the governments that come into conflict with the U.S. do, or in the direction of being too credulous about it. At the risk of sounding like a mealy mouse centrist, I honestly have seen plenty of both. I think that both of those things happen. But it is
just one side has like no power, but I'm not exonerating it.
Yeah,
but it is, yeah.
No, well, I mean, also to the extent that we're talking about the stuff that's happening within the left, I think nobody has any power.
That's a good point.
Well, yeah, but it is one side is saying stuff that is being said by powerful people, and it is being used, functioning as a way to make people like war ready. It is. I mean, whether or not I'm not saying every leftist who says that is intentionally doing that, but.
Well, I mean, so that's the question, right? Is that something like, what's the relationship between the thing that we all agree on, which is opposing wars, and then having sort of a nuanced and honest appreciation of these things. And I think you can argue that in both directions. That obviously, if you're being credulous about ridiculous propaganda that's being used to justify wars, that's bad. But if you're being, but if you're slipping into denialism about real stuff, then not only does that, is that unhelpful or just inaccurate in other ways, but I think it can make you a less
can be alienating, right?
It can make you a less effective messenger.
I agree. That's true.
Of anti-war politics.
I think what we're all agreeing on here is that China is the model.
Yes.
Yes.
Should try to. We should try to take that model and implement. That's where you were going with that, right?
That's correct.
China, Syria.
Yeah.
Any other country you want to throw in there? Iran.
Yeah. All of them
Great
somehow.
models of government that we should want to be wanting to
Somehow,
replicate.
all three of those things. The China.
Like, yeah, just like let's take them all and mush them together and make a country out of that model of government.
and that is what I was hoping would happen if Bernie Sanders became president.
Right?
Especially the Iran part. What were you going to say, Danny?
Ayatollah Bernie.
Yeah, right.
I don't even remember.
Okay. Fair enough. So, I mean, I think actually, Daniel has written some really good stuff about the question of like if what we actually would have hoped to happen if Bernie Sanders become president, like what that foreign policy, not what it necessarily would have looked like, but what we would have hoped for it to look like, with seeing, okay, don't start any new wars, don't impose sanctions on other countries as the beginning of wisdom. But I also do think, and this gets back to the question about being too technocratic or ignoring an important complexity, that it's not the whole thing, and that the left. I know we're nearing the end of the discussion here, but I think the American left hasn't spent nearly enough time thinking about how to wind down American empire. How, like, if we actually did have any power, how that would happen.
Ben, it's funny you should say that, because one of the things that I was promoting, should Bernie have won, would have been basically creating a series of task forces, because we don't even have basic power constellations of this enormous domestic and global structure. So there's no even a weak point to attack right now. So I think what we could spend, we're going to be out of power for a long time. We could spend some time thinking through that and really trying to get an old 30s style power constellation going on where power.
I also would just say two things. So one thing is related to what you're saying, and Ben and Forrest, I heard you guys talking at the beginning about how, people shouldn't get too excited about Biden moving. And of course, that's totally true. And he will, he's not going to, people are give him, create the opportunity so that they can, no, it's not opportunity. It's they need to feel political pain and fear not doing the right thing. That's how they're going to move, to the extent that they move. But I also, and you guys were saying, oh, obviously that's not going to happen. It's going to be elections and making a bigger squad. But these are unprecedented times. So I kind of want to urge people or caution people away from being totally clairvoyant or predicting the future. Because I do think this pandemic does bring a lot of things to a head. And the other thing I just want to say about imperialism, there's this, there's obviously a liberal left divide, and then there's kind of, increasingly a left divide that we're seeing, a lot of online divisions. But I would say that one side of that left in general, I'm generalizing, but focuses more on imperialism than the other side. And to these, my comrades, and I use that word, having known what that word means. I mean, everyone's welcome, but some people use that word, and it's you need to actually Google that to know what you're talking about. But I would say that I think there's a mistake made. And this is obviously, I'm such a Bernie bro, and I love Bernie, and I put him on a pedestal. But I do think that the anti-imperialist left can be purity politics wise, purity politically, whatever the word is. They can engage in a purity politics that's dangerous, I think, with the squad and with leftists. Because here's the thing, are any of the people who are serving in Congress as anti-imperialists as we would like them to be? No. Any people in the Senate? No. But if you don't think there's a difference between someone who would vote against a sanction and someone who wouldn't, and if you don't think that makes a real concrete difference in people's lives, I just think that's I just think it's kind of ridiculous. So I'm just saying that because I think that it's a bit they're all so bad argument, especially when it comes to foreign policy, is a fairly weak one. And that even if we acknowledge that these people have an imperialist framework that we reject, if you care about the lives of the people in those countries which are being killed through through war, obviously, but more frequently through sanctions, right, where people are just dying, Like we should look at that and look at how these people can
You're
be.
right.
I-
It's like recognizing the nuance, the
Okay.
difference between
Oh,
Biden or Trump.
I know Daniel has
Yeah.
to go.
Right. Like I was saying, one side cares about imperialism, the other doesn't. And Daniel's on the other side. I'm
Daniel
just
doesn't care
kidding.
about
That's a
imperialism.
joke. That's a
Gotta
joke.
go.
The right side is.
We'll see him on this channel insanely soon. So, and with ridiculous frequency. So I'll see you soon, Daniel. I did just want to say, Katie, that I think I think the second point is absolutely right. Like I had lots of problems with Bernie on foreign policy, especially the first time he ran. In fact, that was my biggest hesitation about supporting him, because the mixed record there. But also, there is a pretty stark difference between Hillary Clinton saying on the debate stage that Henry Kissinger was her best friend, and Bernie responding to that by bringing up the coup against Allende. So I think that's pretty stark. And I think on the first point, the distinction that I would make is that I don't think that you're necessarily wrong in thinking, okay, we're living in unprecedented times. This stuff is all incredibly unpredictable. Who knows what could happen in different areas? I think that's all absolutely right. So I think it is probably locally true for some areas that, that Biden might, shift, and defy expectations in certain ways. But I think that overall, and we're going to have Crystal Ball on next week and get into much more of the domestic policy stuff then, but overall, I think anywhere where there's a decision that we would want that would really put him into conflict with capital, domestically, or really with the military industrial complex, abroad, he's just not. I think it's relatively unrealistic to think that those are goals that can be accomplished through pressuring the Biden administration, whether the vision of pressuring him is sort of politely lobbying behind the scenes or whether it's something more outsidery and confrontational. I think that Biden's at some really basic level, Biden's going to Biden. And so,
unless his life is made. I mean, again, it's not because I think he's going to be Biden. But it's not. Yeah. I mean, I think that also, wouldn't you have said that, if someone had said Bernie Sanders is going to be a national contender, wouldn't you have been like, nice idea?
No, I would have thought that was crazy. I mean, I actually just rewatched last week to write something for Jacobin, the footage of Bernie Sanders announcing for president the first time in 2015.
5 people.
Yeah. He's talking to a handful of reporters. There are no civilians there.
Right.
And he literally takes a speech, he has a speech on a piece of paper that was folded up in his pocket. And so he takes it out of his pocket. The first thing he tells them is that he'll take a couple questions, but I don't have an endless amount of time. I got to get back inside. He's on his lunch break or something. And
That's so
and just the gap between that and what happened later is insane. So I think there are these openings that will exist for the left that you can't see coming in advance. I think that's totally true. But what I think, and maybe I'll be proven wrong in this, but what I think is that, we can't predict when those openings are going to come, but I think those openings are going to be about beating centrists rather than about
and dragging centrists.
Somehow dragging them to the left and getting them to do left-wing things. Because I think that past a certain point, I think even forget the Bernie program, even just to fulfill all the stuff that he said he would do when he was running for president, I think that he would have to confront the donor class in a way that I just have a hard time imagining him doing.
Right. Mm-hmm. And Rania, I know this is your show, Ben. It's been going on for a while. You were saying something about the imperialism question and overly vilifying them in response to what I said.
I don't even remember.
I was sometimes our fellow anti-imperialist leftists can be overly dismissive of the difference between a squad member or Bernie Sanders and centrist Dem, and I think it's to our detriment.
Yeah, I think it's what I was saying is I think even Biden and Republicans are different. I don't think it's right to suggest they're all the same. They're not. There are totally nuances. I think it's really important. People got mad at me for this, but I think it's important that Biden's president and not Trump. I don't think that should be a controversial thing to say, but I actually think there's going to be people who are still going to suffer, obviously, because the U.S. foreign policy sucks. but there's definitely going to be slightly less. Like Biden probably
It
will
does
wind
matter
down
whether we go to war with Iran.
right. Like he'll probably wind down
Right.
support for the war in Yemen. That's like a big deal.
Yeah.
We're not going to have a war with Iran. I hope there's less likelihood of that. That's a big deal. And I'm like, I mean, I live in this region, so like I'm personally affected by that. I like the consequences of those things really do affect me in a way where I can feel it, right?
Yeah.
Even the government in Lebanon waited to decide what it was going to do next based on who won the presidency, because that it does make a difference. They know it makes a difference, right? So so if even Biden and Trump is a difference, however slight, it's like a whole planet of a difference between squad members and Biden. That doesn't mean I think we should just be like uncritically supportive of squad members. I have a lot of issues with them, but like I don't think it's right to attack them in a way that would alienate them rather than actually try and influence them, because those are people that you could actually have influence over.
Those are people you could influence.
Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's the distinction. I mean, it's hate to bring after all the anti-Semitism we already had, to bring up Carl Schmitt, but that like friend enemy distinction is is crucial. And to say, I think it's a mistake to treat enemies as a friend and friends. It's also a mistake to treat friends as enemies. And that's not to say that that people, obviously all politicians should be.
Right. Or look at Rand Paul, who has better war record, is better on war than Tony Blinken. And he was like the most critical person in the entire questioning of Blinken, who was actually anti-war, which is a
Rand Paul's a useful person on certain issues.
Yeah.
I mean, he is like a senator too. So
he's terrible and he's racist, and we all know that. Sorry, there I go again. Off that really into my head.
So yeah,
I guess a counterpoint, though, I mean a slight one, is that, I mean, I think that there is a way to pressure people either in the squad or Bernie or whoever it is, because on foreign policy issues specifically, because in 2016, Bernie was pressured really hard by Palestinian rights activists who refused to support him.
And he totally moved, because that's the thing.
And I mean, with Bernie, it's
I'm not saying don't. They should be criticized, but I'm just saying it should be recognized that these people can be moved.
Yeah,
it shouldn't be just like throw them away and treat them like they're neocons.
I think there's a way to criticize them. There's a way to criticize them, and then there's a way
to
also
group.
Well, I'm not even talking about that as much of like. I think there's like there's a what is it, subtext, a force to vote subtext, but like putting that aside and our discourse around the squad, I mean more like I think people just think like someone's not anti-imperialist enough, so fuck that. And it's like, no, there are people who, first of all, people will respond to pressure, but on this issue in particular, like people are with us when it comes to like Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Bernie Sanders, I think Cori Bush, like these are people who are already with us.
I think what you're talking about, Katie, is has a lot to do with like this kind of like acceptance of being powerless. It's like you're so used to having zero influence and power, and as individuals, like people don't actually have power. It's more like with what you brought up, Forrest, about Palestine, if Bernie being moved on Palestine back in 2016, that didn't just happen because people yelled on Twitter. That actually mostly happened because of Palestine solidarity organizations that were connected to people inside the Bernie Sanders movement.
Yeah.
And people like Cornel West made a difference there too, right? Like he was a surrogate. People around Bernie Sanders like helped move him on that issue. And so I think that was like one of these rare moments where people were like, wait, what? We can move a politician? And there's still, because of like the left never having any power, there's this automatic sort of like resorting to online outrage, because you almost don't realize that like actually these people, if you're in an organized group, will maybe listen to you because you're their base. They're not funded by corporate donors.
Yeah.
And
so obviously I'm glad that Katie brought up Force the Vote, because when I pretended I want to have you on to talk about foreign policy, my agenda was that I was hoping like 6.
No, I just feel like that's obviously, but we're talking about discourse. But
yeah. If at all possible, I'd like this to be entirely about that. Actually,
yeah,
and
edit out everything, but
every subsequent episode.
No, but I guess I feel,
but no, I mean, I do agree, right? So like, I think we can make a distinction and say, of course, all politicians should be criticized, no question. But I think Forrest is right. You criticize them in different ways, and two, I think that just in terms of what Rania is talking about, that like some people have like parameters their politics that are defined by what the donors will let them get away with, and some people don't, and the people that don't are going to be pressurable in ways that the ones who aren't, who do have those parameters aren't going to be. So I think that the danger, I think the analytic mistake that people make is just saying, okay, do you check these boxes? Do you have the right positions on these? No, therefore, screw you, which I think then leads them to miss things that would actually matter if you care about if you care about changing the actual policy positions.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I guess my thing is like more particular about like how people with whom I agree on foreign policy. I think like we can't just dismiss these people. I don't care if you think they're sellouts. I don't care if you think they're insufficiently anti-imperialist. Like, on some level that voting against sanctions makes a huge difference. Like, that these are things, and Rania, this is kind of why I wanted to bring this up with you, because you're someone who lives the effects of these things. And it's like, I'm not like romanticizing at all. Like, I think people probably know that I'm pretty critical of U.S. foreign policy. And I just think that there is a hopelessness that can actually be like result in letting the bad guys win. Like, there is work to be done. I don't really care what you think about these people. Like, is work to be done around foreign policy issues. And it's really important to do that. And again, you don't have to, this isn't even about the discourse you use, although that is a strategic question too, because there is obviously, when there's too much discourse in one direction, I think it can bite you in the ass and alienate people and cause people to, like bunker mentality, protect and defend. But what I'm just saying is that this is really more towards like the people with whom I usually agree, which is that we can't abandon foreign policy fights because we don't think people are legitimately.
If you do that, you're taking yourself out of the equation too. Like you're choosing to voluntarily remove yourself from being able to have any influence.
Yeah, and you don't even have to
be somebody with a platform.
Yeah,
because no one's going to listen to you if you're just yelling at them and calling them names. And I guess I can see the parallel with Force the Vote. Because that kind of like, it started to become like that. But I think, again, like, I think that reaction from people also has to do with a kind of learned helplessness. It's and
it's totally understandable. And there's an outrage. And I think that like it's like, if you're angrier at people who are outraged, and I'm talking about like random people, not people who are, because everyone makes this a referendum on a few people, but like, if you're angrier at people for being outraged than you are about the things they're outraged about, that's not, you may want to check your priorities.
No, I think that's right. I mean, although the flip side of that is that, I mean, obviously that's right about priorities, but I think the flip side is that not all forms of outrage are helpful in actually like in actually accomplishing the things that we care about, as whether it's achieving Medicare for all or winding down American empire. Or any of the rest of that, and I think that learned helplessness, that Rania was talking about earlier, is like at the heart of a lot of this stuff, because I mean, I think a lot of the pathologies of the U.S. left are just a function of the fact that it's been so long. I mean, really never, right? That we've had anything like real power, but like it's been so long since we even had like the hope of it. That I think a lot of people get really used to sort of seeing that what it is to be on the left as this sort of purely like symbolic, like registering your dissent against all the horrible shit that's going on, which is, totally understandable if you're thinking about like, I mean, most of the time that like, that most of the time, that most like leftists, probably, have, well, I guess not now because, most leftists only, have only been leftists for 5 years, but, old people like me, that like most of the time, have been alive, there was never any point where it felt like there was any hope of achieving real world power. But the danger of that is that if you see it as purely a matter of like having a kind of symbolic protest, showing people that you're on the right side, then and it's just kind of performing your outrage, then that can be really counterproductive when there actually are any kind of openings to do anything in the real world, especially because if you see politics as purely about exhibiting your outrage and exhibiting your moral commitment, to a better world, then it's really easy to fall into spending all of your time interrogating other people's commitment. And,
I think
that said, I do think that I do think that people have different roles to play.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And there's a radical flank and an angry flank too.
I don't want to say there shouldn't be any outrage, because I remember.
No, there's certainly.
And I'm not saying you're saying that at all. I think I want to be clear that I personally do think that it's useful to have those people, those certain people who do that, because that pressure, that sort of public ridiculing kind of pressure, does play a useful role. It is important. And I'll give an example. I mean, Forrest gave an example of the Palestine issue, and it's a really good example of like a multifaceted approach where you have this sort of like online outrage and figures and I actually played a role in that. I was working at the Electronic Intifada back then, and I wrote several articles about Bernie Sanders' history with Palestine, and they were quite nuanced, but I mean, I wasn't nice about it.
Right.
And I think I've seen, Ali Abunimah, who's in charge of the Electronic Intifada, has continued to do that with Rashida Tlaib, and it's continued to push her on the issue of, she didn't initially endorse BDS. She was pressured to by people both inside the sort of the Palestine solidarity community that plays that influential role as pressure groups, but also from the public outrage. So I think that those two things can work in concert together, but it shouldn't just be the public outrage, because that is not effective and it's not a good strategy, because ultimately if that's all you're doing, then you will alienate people who otherwise could actually be
brought over. Right. I think that's the fine line, but I do agree with you that there is the Overton window does shift, and having a radical flank, both politically radical, but also almost behaviorally, or just an angry flank can be productive, because then you get to point to people and you're like, I'm not doing that, but look at what people are doing over there. That's why we have to give them something.
Right. I think also when it comes to foreign policy, it's not just pushing. I mean, definitely pushing is part of it, but squad members and Bernie and whoever else is a progressive leader has to know that people actually care about these issues deeply, because I think it's really easy to push domestic issues and say Medicare for all, people want healthcare. You know what I mean? Free college or free, public colleges, that would really help a lot of people. I think, progressive leaders have to know that there are people that have their back on some of these anti-imperialist issues, because it's hard to take that line if you're I feel this way, but I don't know if, people that I'm going to have as constituents.
Which is why I think linking the foreign policy stuff to the domestic is so important. Although for me, I mean, it's probably not hard to imagine that that's not primarily why I care about it, but that's certainly if you want to meet people where they're at, that is one of the most useful, rhorical, teachable things.
If you want to get ordinary Americans to care about it, it's certainly one of the most effective.
Also, those outrage people, now I'm becoming pro outrage, but those outrage people do also create space.
That's what I'm saying. They drag it.
The crazier they sound, the more calm you sound.
But behavior radical.
I'm pro outrage, but what I would say is that I'm pro well-targeted outrage. I think that there are productive forms of outrage, and I think there are unproductive forms of outrage. And that's the distinction that I'd make. But gonna bring on our good friend David Griscom for the next segment. Meanwhile, thank you so much to Rania Khalek, who's GTAA has recognized as the interim president of Lebanon.
Thank you.
Apparently.
Congratulations.
Yeah, Rania, when can you do my show again? I thought you were off. I thought you were off. What's 6 minutes? Anyway, I'll talk to you. Rania, go on Twitter. I want to DM you.
Okay. We'll talk on Twitter. It was such a pleasure to be on. Thanks, guys.
I'll keep watching. Don't worry, guys. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Forrest.
Thank you so much,
Hi,
Rania.
David.
Thank you, Katie. I'll see you very soon on your show. And always a pleasure.
Yeah, 7 p.m. Wednesday, Thursdays and Sundays. We moved to Thursdays now. Thursdays and Sundays. I have to tell you that. I didn't update you. Okay. Bye, guys.
Right. See ya.
What's up, y'all?
What's going on?
How are you doing?
I love the mountain decal behind you.
Thanks so much. Yeah.
I have this more primitive mountain. I don't know.
It's the East Coast versus the West Coast. They're on it, man.
Nice. So you're back in Portland right now?
Oh no, I'm back in New York, packing things up on the way back to Austin.
Oh, okay. So you are ready to go to Austin now. All right. I'm in New York City. No. You're in New York, but you're about to be in Austin.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah.
He's in JFK right now. Can't you see the big?
I'm in flight.
Nice. So talk about the Highwaymen this week.
Yeah, man. I mean, for folks who are listening to this and they're not familiar, I mean, there really isn't much to say about the Highwaymen other than it's Waylon Jennings, Willie Nelson, Johnny Cash, and Chris Christopherson. I was waiting to talk about them as like a collective until we had gone through all four of those guys. But I mean, the Highwaymen is probably one of the few examples of a supergroup really, really hitting out of the park. They're a lot of fun. That's a good one, especially if you're not very familiar with country music and the outlaw movement. If you just want to type in the Highwaymen into YouTube and just let the shuffle take you where it will, it's just going to move you from Highwaymen performing their original songs or, covers of one of the guys' jams all together, or just, to a nice clip of, Willie Nelson or whomever. Fun as hell. Obviously, their most famous song is "The Highwaymen," which I don't know if you had heard before, Ben.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, I realized that I had. Yeah, for sure.
But that's like a pure, it's a fun ass song, but it's also has a very 80s vibe to it. The music video is hilarious, just like scenes of people all throughout history, and then you just see like Willie Nelson's like face pop up in the horizon. But the Highwayman song is honestly, it's one of my personal favorites of all time. Just because a lot of, especially like the outlaw movement, was sort of recognizing that things were changing and there was a certain kind of American story that was disappearing, and trying to pay witness to that. But I like the Highwaymen song a lot because it sort of takes us through history of all these kind of people who embody the spirit. So, the first one is like the highwaymen who used to, rob coaches with their sword and pistol by their side. And then they go on to the sailors who are, conquering the seas. But then, Waylon Jennings brings in the dam builder. Right. And like it's just an interesting, contribution to that story. It's like, this is like so much more than just like one particular moment, but like a kind of way of being. And it's very somber, it's reflective, and it's remembering. But I don't know, maybe I'm goofy and too sentimental, but I love the last verse of the song, which is Johnny Cash jumping in and talking about he'll fly a starship.
Yeah.
So it's like he's in the future, and he's talking about being so I don't know, some kind of space pirate or something, flying across the universe. And I think it's a really beautiful song for that. And I also have to say, if it's all right, not too sentimental, but that last verse in particular, it does make me think of our friend Michael a lot, particularly the last line. I've sort of dedicated this bit to him in my my heart of hearts. I'll fly a starship across the universe divide, and when I reach the other side, I'll find a place to rest my spirit if I can. Perhaps I may become a highwayman again, or I may be a simple drop of rain, but I will remain, and I'll be back again and again and again and again. And to me, you know, I just found that it's just such a beautiful line, and I think the more backwards looking aspects of country music and those characters, I think, is represented better if you understand it in its forward looking way too, which is just like recognizing these really beautiful and interesting stories and people who, you know, made our history what it was, but also sort of recognizing that as actually almost like a universal quality of humanity, which I think is really sweet.
Yeah, you can be, I mean, Jesus, I mean, if you could ever be sentimental, it's on the drinking whiskey and talking about country music segment at the end.
No, that's definitely true. I know I've been on a whole thing today, I must say. But yeah, no, it's a beautiful, I mean, it's like their music's really good. I really like American Remains, which is honestly from their second major album that they came out together. Very similar line about sort of going through all these different characters, a shotgun rider on the San Jacinto line, a river gambler who gets caught cheating. But I like this line because I know this is a big part of our of this segment, though, is like being sentimental, but also recognizing this kind of radical heritage that we have here. Willie Nelson sings this verse, which I really love. I'm a Midwest farmer. I make my living off the land. I ride a John Deere tractor. I'm a liberated man, but the rain hasn't fallen since the middle of July, and soon my crops will die. The bank man says he likes me, but there's nothing he can do. He tells me that he's coming, but the clouds are coming too. He ain't my friend. I'll ride again, right? And I feel like that's good, good kind of class consciousness there as well.
That is good.
Yeah, what else? There's so many good songs. There's Welfare Line, which is a good song on their first album too. About sort of being down and out. I fought for my country.
Which is funny, by the way, I have to say, that, reminds me of as much as it's like kind of defiling the segment to even bring this up here. The what I would probably be my nomination for the most evil country song ever recorded is that Hank Williams thing about McCain.
Oh yeah.
Which actually has, I was thinking about that when you had the line about the farmers and the banks, because there's actually, that song actually has lyrics in defense of bankers, that like the government was making them do those loans.
I know. Oh yeah, you're right. I mean, that song, honestly, that Hank Williams Jr. song, and honestly, like we have to do a Hank Williams Jr. episode one time, because I will say, like, Hank Williams Jr. is like one of like my problematic faves. Like, I love some of his songs. Like, I even love some of his like 2000 stuff, like Country Boy Can Survive.
Country Boy Can Survive is great. Like, Jesus. I mean, obviously, I love Whiskey Benson, Hellbound.
OD'd in Denver. Yeah, like no, he has some great songs, but just like honestly, just politically, absolutely. That's what happens when you get super rich too. I'm sorry, it really is. But not that he really grew up, without sort of having a place in the world, being the son of like one of the greatest and most famous country singers of all time. I'm sure it's hard following your daddy's footsteps, but it's a little bit of a different struggle than most of us have, I must say. But like it is such like a night and day shift listening to these Highwaymen songs. And there's no doubt about it that comes from Willie. No doubt about it comes from Johnny Cash and Chris, and also I could probably feel it all day long. Catch catfish from dusk till dawn. Like that's a good line. That's Hank Williams Jr. The welfare songs really is like really good, especially doing that like in 1985 when that was such a hotbed issue. Saying like I fought for my country. Lord knows I did my best. I crawled through some foreign field. They pinned a ribbon to my chest, and then they just sort of is talking about pass the bottle around, boys. Let's talk about the old times. Nights rolling in. It's cold as sin here on the welfare line, right? And it's just like all these people who've done a lot in their life, lived pretty full lives, and they're down and out and they need a little help. I think that's a really beautiful one. Another one too, if you watch these like old concerts, Living Legend, which is a song on the first Highwaymen album, or maybe Highwaymen too. I might be wrong about that. Anyways, Chris Christopherson like opens it up and says like, this song could have been written by Jesus Christ or Che Guevara, you know, those kind of revolutionaries. And it's just like, that's that lefty shit that we were talking about last week.
Nice.
Yeah, man. You know, other jams like There Ain't No Good Chain Gang is one of my personal favorites that you can listen to them. I guess, and I just have to you know, just throw in, just because it's always good to tell these like little stories, is that when Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings, Johnny Cash is a few years older than Waylon, but Johnny apparently was like a real chef. They were all roommates together in Nashville before they made it big. And Johnny Cash was like a really like kind of like grandma to all these guys. Was making them biscuits and gravy and fried chicken, and is always covered in flour, like cooking up a storm for these guys, which is just fun to watch them as they're like, you know, older and just extremely successful and legends. Just realizing that, you know, there was a time these guys were just like 20 years old, just like getting drunk together. Johnny Cash making sure everybody's having enough food.
Yeah, no, I could, no, I man, I could just imagine. It's like yeah, I mean, there are many nights, you know, that all the nights of my life when you had the sort of like drunk snack, you know, at the at the end of the night. But
yeah, imagine that was Johnny Cash bringing you some biscuits, man. No, it's so good. And I was actually watching some of the Highwaymen's like just videos on YouTube before I came on here, and it was so funny just sitting there looking at them all like smiling, having a good time together. And remembering the story I told you last week about Chris Christopherson, about how he was so desperate to get Johnny Cash to just listen to his music that he flew a helicopter onto Johnny Cash's like front lawn to get his attention. And then, you know, 25 years later, they're like on a big stage together, like one of the most successful super groups of all time. It's very funny. Stuff of legends.
Yeah. Unrelated, but since you had me, you know, which by the way, that's gonna be in my head for a long time. I think that association with Michael and that like that you know, of the Highwaymen, but and somebody brought it in the chat. I'll bring back the Gulag segment from TMDA. Those are so fun.
No, those are fun. Or the pyramid. That's the real throwback. The throwback.
Yeah,
like early days. The pyramid, man.
The best Gulag segment you guys did was when you did like the rapid fire, like everybody in the Gulag one. And
that was I think the first one I was on for. It was the one about everybody. It was about the Ilhan Omar, you know, anti-Semitism controversy, and so we did it as a mass trial. You know, to like we had like I think we condemned like you know a couple hundred people to the Gulag over the course of that segment.
Yeah, but just like in proper Soviet tradition, there were mistakes. Like, I can't remember who. I threw a couple people in just in the rapid fire section, forgetting people's names and throwing in innocents.
I think also it was like everybody at the New York Times was one of them. Like,
yeah, it was a good time, man. Those are
that's right. Yeah, everybody at the New York Times. Yeah, they like was it there was some kind of like chord, you know, that like it was played every time, you know, that they you know, that we sentenced somebody new to, you know, which I remember actually, it was before that episode when I was on, but I remember Michael, you know, making a comment at some point in there. And obviously his you know, his softy side, it's not surprising that he eventually phased that out, you know, but but I remember him making a comment that like
got us in trouble with Bernie's team, honestly. That's why we stopped doing it.
There were three.
They were like, we can't get Bernie on if you don't stop doing the Gulag. And
yeah, fair enough. Although yeah, and you know, whatever. I mean, he was like he was you know, he was very, you know, I think he knew when to, you know, pragmatically roll with something and when to draw a line principle. So like, you know, he did, you know, I mean, he wrote that you know, he wrote that article with Gene about you know, Ilhan Omar's you know, bad vote on the Armenia, you know, genocide thing, you know, even knowing that was, you know, potentially burning a bridge. But you know, I mean, a joke about the gulag, you know, wasn't going to be a live principle. So fair enough. But yeah, I do remember when he still had it, though, him making a really good comment on one of those episodes about how, like, there are three kinds of people listening, who, like, they're the people who are like, you know, who are like demented tankies, who are like, you know, oh yeah, no, that's great, just like we really will someday, you know. And then, like, they're the people who are like, oh my god, I can't believe they would joke about that. That's terrible.
Yeah.
You know? And then there are the people who just kind of take it in the spirit that's intended in, which is exactly
so fun. No, exactly, man. It was good times.
Yeah.
Seriously.
No, those were such good. Those are some of my, like, you know, I don't, you know, I want to make this a whole about that, but I mean, those are, I think, going to be like, you know, when I'm much older, you know, is making biscuits and gravy for the young podcasters. You know, I'm still like, those are still going to be some of my very, very favorite memories, you know, of, actually I could probably just end the sentence there, but yeah, no, that's no question. So, so people who want to get into, you know, get into the Highwaymen, who haven't listened to much of that stuff, you know, what a good, you know, where should they start?
I mean, you know, start with the OG song, man, the Highwaymen. You know, self-titled jam's a good time. You know, it's a super group. So the Highwaymen is their first and most famous album. Highwaymen 2 is pretty good. They got Silver Stallion on that, which is a great jam. You got what else? I mean, American Remains is one of my favorite of all. I mean, like, I think the Highwaymen, like, main song is probably my favorite of all time, but I've listened to it so much that I've been really feeling American Remains, which honestly has like a very similar kind of, musically it sounds very similar, but that's a really great song. And yeah, man, just type in Highwaymen into YouTube, and you're gonna be treated with something nice with that. I promise you.
Nice. All right. Thanks, brother. We'll always really enjoy this.
Yeah, of course, man. Take care, y'all.
All right. So.
All right, so we are going to, if people have any more super chat questions that they want Forrest and I to answer, we will do that at the end. First, though, I want to play a little teaser for the Thursday patron episode this week, which is Daniel Bessner and Amber Lee Frost. Talking about their Jacobin article, delving into the mysteries and lunacy of QAnon. So let's get into that. Since after whatever you want to call what happened on January 6th, you know, in the article that you and I wrote, Daniel, you know, we had a whole thing about why, you know, we don't think it's right to call it a coup, right? You know, riot, insurrection, whatever, you know. But after that, one of the things that you point out is that even though probably, you know, if you count up the word QAnon as it's used in news coverage, you find tons of instances of nothing else. The Q shaman, you know, was the big image that everybody remembered from the storming of the Capitol. What's that?
You gotta look.
Yeah.
Fit guy. He's always gonna get covered in America.
Yeah. No, I think he. I think if he ever gets out of prison, I think he could parlay this into, you know, into some media stuff. You know, like his image has been out there a lot. You know, he looked good. It was fun. You know?
He's got a very strong brand. Very strong brand. He's the ultimate influencer, some might say.
Yes. But despite all of that, right? Despite all of the coverage, you know, of the, you know, the Q shaman, they're like most of the descriptions in the media of the riot on the 6th sort of talked in general terms about it being, you know, being Trump supporters in ways that don't make a lot of distinctions, you know, between different groups within it. But of course, the massive disproportionate group of people who were at the Capitol were people who believe in QAnon, which is pretty, as you guys talk about, it's a pretty heterogeneous group in itself, but it's also a very specific thing, right? There are something like 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump. There are not, I hope, 70 million people who believe in the cabal of satanic pedophiles that like all Democrats and most Republicans are part of.
Okay, I actually would push back on that.
Okay.
Points. One is that now I think the media has since corrected, and I'm like, oh, this is a shit ton of few people. Initially, they did anything they possibly could to keep from getting any kind of demography of the crowds, because that's not as good television as being like mortified, I guess. And then two, they're not a specific group. You mentioned that they're heterogeneous, but they're distinct without being specific, which is a very, it's a distinction, I guess. So
with a difference.
Yeah, it's a distinction with a difference. We bring up this sort of variety of people who are sort of like into Q, but we didn't want to get stuck in the weeds with how many people thought favorably of QAnon, especially because initial polling is sort of vague enough to where you don't get a very good sense of it. Like, people are you approving of QAnon is sometimes the question that they ask people, or how do you feel about QAnon? And people will be like, yeah, and it's like, you don't know if they mean Epstein or lizard people or, stop the steal. Like it's not only is it impossible to get like a full ranging like sort of ethnography on these people, never mind like, demographic information, like the levels of faith and the areas of like adoption are also totally unclear.
And also, just to build on that, I think what we were trying to get at a little bit in the article, and exactly what Amber just said, is that it's almost a sensibility, right? As opposed to a particular, like, you're not going to really have the QAnon checklist to determine whether someone QAnon, like you can with fascism, right? If they do these eight things, it's fascism. You can't really with you can't really quite do that with QAnon, because it's really more of a sensibility. Certainly, I would say a right-wing sensibility that's organized around like a lot of right-wing tropes that have dominated, that have basically ebbed and flowed in the last 2 centuries. You get some Elders of Zion in there. You get some more recent racist types of tropes. But it's really more the sort of like, the way we described it, I think, was apt, an anti-establishment, but nonetheless authoritarian sensibility is really what unites a lot of these very disparate sectors of this broader Q phenomenon.
Kill the elites, put Trump on the throne, kind of thing. It's very, yeah. Which I think speaks to the limits of their imagination and the kind of delusion that goes along with it, is that they can't even imagine a world without elites. What they can only hope for is like, this figure of Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I thought one of the most striking comparisons in the article, you talked about Aaron Sorkin's movie, The Trial of the Chicago 7, where he puts into Abby Hoffman's mouth some line like, I think the institutions of this country are great right now. They just happen to be populated by terrible people, which of course isn't something Hoffman would say, but it's a very pure distillation of Sorkin-esque liberalism. And in weird way, as you point out, this is also what what the Q crowd broadly believes.
The ideology is so strong that like it still thrives among a population of people who have essentially been living through a kind of mass psychotic break, like a mass break with reality. Like the ideology of America is good, and America functions well when under the proper operator. That is so intense in America that people who believe like in lizard people and that Sandy Hook was fake still believe it.
It's like to me, I understand it as an extension of Fisher's capitalist realism, whatever you want to call it. There's an American realism, there's a constitutional realism, whatever it may be. They can't even imagine another structure, which I think is it's part of that lack of imagination, which has a million different causes that sort of force this sincere derangement of the particular form that the break took. And it's just not surprising that QAnon has really exploded during COVID, right? This extreme situation, which almost begs for a structural solution. People who can't abide that for whatever reason have embraced this series of conspiracy theories.
Well, plus, just on a much more mundane level, so many people are spending so much time alone with the internet.
Yeah, we were trolling the boards, not trolling in the, fucking with people, which is also why we did put links to any of these groups on here. I didn't want anyone to mess with these people, but looking at the boards of people who were ex-QAnon and who had lost family to QAnon. I mean, like, it's a really extended kind of world. Like I saw a lot of people say, I had never heard of QAnon until the lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, well, that's a perfect storm, clearly.
Right, because you could also think about it, like, what is the opposition to QAnon offering? Joe Biden's offering return to normalcy, right? And so if the normal wasn't that good, or if you had problems with the normal, where are you going to go?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's obviously, as time goes on, we'll be able to look at these things with clearer eyes. But I think that's one of the major reasons that QAnon has exploded. You have this extreme situation, and really nowhere with these energies to go.
Yeah. So that episode is dropping on Thursday for patrons, and I would and everybody should read their article. In Jacobin, which is very good. It's like a very it's a really nuanced like take on what's going on. Why we have this like super insane conspiracy theory that's suddenly become so popular. They go into a lot of stuff in there about how what to do if you have like a loved one who's fallen into this, and like what you can say that's not just gonna convince them that like you're part of the conspiracy and push you even further away. They talk, like one of the things that, I mean, we talk about all this in the interview, but one of the things that I found like really striking that they mentioned in their article is that one of the most popular Q conspiracy theories is that Donald Trump was going to forgive every American's medical debt.
Yeah, that's insane.
It's insane, but it's so fucking revealing. Like that's yeah.
No, a lot of it's struggling people. I mean, a lot of them. You know what I mean? With and I think that there's a certain irony to QAnon's existence in that they think that Donald Trump was going to be the one.
Yeah. Donald Trump, of all people, who has never had a passive thought in his entire life for the welfare of another, maybe his daughter, certainly not his sons.
Yeah.
But maybe not even his daughter. Like that he is probably incapable of in a literal psychiatric sense, incapable of experiencing empathy for other people, that he's the guy who's going to do all of this for them. But that's the thing, I mean, whatever, it's a very basic kind of leftist point, but if you can't actually imagine, I mean, this again goes back to Fisher and capitalist realism. If it's just outside of your scope of your imagination, that you could have some sort of political movement that could make change for the grassroots, that could achieve something like universal medical debt cancellation. You have to
rely on a savior that's going to come in and take care of that. I think there's also I think Amber made this point in the interview and maybe in the article. I read like half of it the other night when I was doing this, and then I just kind of got distracted doing other things because I've been so busy with everything. But it's kind of the depoliticization of everything, and politicians kind of become more of a personality, I guess, that you're either vibing with or not. And this is kind of an extreme form of that, because I know a lot of people that supported Trump that aren't necessarily conservative people, but you see this people see Trump as like an asshole, and then a lot of people are assholes and just say, he reminds me of me. You know what I mean? So in that sense, I don't think that it's outside the realm of possibility that finally somebody sees a politician that they that feels like they're part of their group and thinks this person is going to be my savior when everything looks so bleak across the entire.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's this, not that it's the same thing, right? Because obviously QAnon is so demented and just strange and something you couldn't have even imagined existed not that long ago. But I think that the underlying pathology that like all you can imagine is like some savior, doing it for you, is even the same with like the early Obama administration when there were, like it was super common for liberal, like left liberal types to say, it's like, oh, Obama wants all the things that we want. He's just not saying it right now. He's playing like 9-dimensional chess. He's got this master plan where, he's going to save us from all this stuff in the end. He just can't like reveal his cards yet.
And part of that, obviously, with Obama was like, oh, well, he's the first black president. Like, how radical can he really be? Like, at some point, he's going to have enough support behind him. But yeah, I mean, definitely. I think with left liberals, it was a little more muted because what they want is a little bit more muted. Like, they're pretty satisfied with the status quo. They just want, things to be a little bit different. With Trump supporters, I think a lot of people are so desperate that, they want a whole different society, but they, as you said, like they can't imagine, one outside of capitalism. They can't imagine one outside of the status quo. So it kind of just becomes Trump as the savior, like a status quo savior, I guess.
Yeah, no, exactly. Because I mean, like as insane as it is, like that feels more realistic that, there's going to be some like Messiah figure who's going to save you from within the system. But yeah, so it's an interesting article. It's a really interesting interview. Just going to say one more time, if you want access to that, as well as every other Thursday episode, then you can go to the Patreon. That's patreon.com/Ben Burgess. And so $5 a month, you get all of that. You get the Discord server and pretty regular, call them Discord office hours, group voice chats. So I did one earlier today, with patrons, which was a lot of fun, because it's just like answering whatever, it's like just letting people, talk about or ask questions about whatever they want to. Like we kind of, so, we ranged all the way from like, kind of the history of the labor movement and the ways that, that working together in common struggle can help people get over prejudices, all the way to like stuff about like Wittgenstein and logical positivism. Cause like, that's what people were asking about, to like Ayn Rand and objectivism and, and all that stuff. So it was, those were always a lot of fun, and there are other good, patron benefits that, that we've been thinking about and talking about. At a certain point, it's just a question of getting, if like we're going to do other things, we have to pay people for them, so it's a question of just building up to the point where we can do that.
Yeah.
But it's again, it's something, I don't want to make it sound like a subscription service. It's solidarity. If you think that this is good work and you want to support it, then this is a way to do it, and it pays everybody's wages, who works in the show, which
I appreciate. I mean,
yeah, fair enough. Anyway, if you can't do that, of course, it also helps to like and subscribe here on YouTube, rate and review on iTunes. I know that listening to people say that on podcasts is sort of, it's like, it's almost like it's like ritual words or something. You've heard it so many times. Yeah. It's sort of become like noise, but these things really do help. And yeah, it's been, things have been, growing at a good clip. Apparently we just found out before we started, a lot of people are listening in Cyprus somehow, whatever sort of community of English speaking leftists, there are there.
Logic is a universal language.
Yeah, fair enough.
Everybody wants a good argument.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a couple more things before we go, unless there are any last minute questions. So I do want to say, since this is, I'm getting my dates right. This is the last regular episode for January. And so we're getting into the last few months before the new book comes out. So if people want to pre-order that, they can do that from Red Emma's is the place that I always like to recommend. I'd heard about them because Michael always encouraged people to buy Against the Web from there. It's a worker-owned bookstore in Baltimore that you can order books from online. So the new book is Canceling Comedians While the World Burns: A Critique of the Contemporary Left, coming out at the end of April, so about 3 months. And that's and basically, like, a lot of what the book is about is the stuff, that extremely perceptive comment that Rania made in the foreign policy panel about about learned helplessness, that a lot of the pathologies of the left, and I mean, this is the kind of the book covers a lot of ground, but I mean, this is kind of the unifying theme. A lot of the pathologies of the left come from the fact that we've been so distant from real power for so long, that we don't even think in those terms anymore. We just think in terms of sort of testing people's moral credentials. Sort of the sort of constant inventory of everybody's soul. Which is, I think, really the opposite of the kind of class politics that we need.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me just say before we sign off that again, episode 27 on Thursday for patrons, and we'll do we'll do another preview here. Is Amber Lee Frost and Daniel Bessner on their Jacobin article about QAnon. Before that, on Wednesday, we are going to be. We're going to be continuing our series of Wednesday, movie review live streams. Very, very full crew again. It's going to be all the same people from last week.
I'm really excited for that. I mean, I don't know. I think that out of everybody to talk about Dr. Strangelove with, Bessner's probably the person that I'd be most excited to talk about that with.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that was, as our producer and resident film critic, Forrest had suggested that bringing Bessner on to talk about Dr. Strangelove. So it's also going to be Jacobin deputy editor Micah Utrecht, and also philosophy professor and cartoonist Ryan Lake. So I actually just saw Dr. Strangelove again for the first time in a long time, actually before this even came up. But I will also probably catch it again tomorrow night, to be fresh on it, before we talk about it.
I'm probably gonna watch it. I watched it on Wednesday after we talked about it, and I'm probably gonna watch it again to try to catch everything that I missed. I used to have it on DVD as a kid. That was like one of the few, because I remember I went to this huge DVD sale and I was looking for like all these Peter Sellers movies, because I was a big fan of like the Pink Panther when I was a kid, and The Mouse That Roared, and like.
Oh yeah.
So which is another movie maybe one day we can.
No, that is actually, that'll be a fun one to actually also be a fun one to watch with Bessner. But but yeah, no, I haven't thought about The Mouse That Roared in a long time. But yeah, I remember that movie.
Another movie where Peter Sellers plays like half the characters.
Yeah. Pink Panther. I've watched it, but it's a pretty vague memory. I don't remember it that well. I remember Mouse That Roared pretty well. Yeah.
Well, he made a bunch of them. I mean, as Inspector Clouseau, it was like a running series.
Yeah.
Like his character. They were all just, I mean, pretty much Peter Sellers vehicles besides the first one.
Fair enough. So yeah, Dr. Strangelove this week. We'll get back. I expect probably we're going to be back to the Scorsese series next week, although not too sure about the details yet. As far as the Sunday night debate live stream, the debate breakdown live streams where we watch old debates on YouTube. The one last week, yesterday, as we're recording this, was a lot of it was a lot of fun. I had Bhaskar Sankara on to watch Christopher Hitchens' 1986 debate. It was Christopher Hitchens and John Judas versus a couple of Ayn Rand people. So that was very much like what you think it would be, but it was a lot of fun.
I was gonna ask to come help with that one, but then I had that root canal, and
I was
I'm still kind of like recovering from it. Like my lips are really chapped from like getting, I don't know. I've got like a 3-part root canal. It's crazy.
Fair enough. This Sunday, going to have Ryan Lake, who people have seen a few times in a few different contexts at this point, and also Mark Warren, who the real heads will remember from that epic, however long that was, 7-hour live stream that we did on election night last year. He's the one who he was talking about his his wife just had kids, and he was on with David Feldman, and Feldman was recommended that he stop loving his children. He'll be much better off long term if he doesn't love his kids. So in any case, so Ryan and Mark will be on with me. I think we're probably going to do another Hitchens one, but we haven't totally settled that yet. But that's going to be on Sunday, and next Monday. The Great Crystal Ball is going to be back. Probably do kind of a domestic policy version of what we did today with Rania and Danny and Katie. So really looking forward to that. Hope people check that out. As always, really appreciate everybody who came and watched and participated in the discussion, sent us super chats. All really good stuff. Really appreciate it. I'll see everybody. Well, people who are watching on the YouTube channel. See everybody in a couple days. Left is best.